So a game called Atomfall released on March 27th, and having seen the announcement trailer a few months before, it really looked like something right up my alley. So I pre-installed it through Game Pass, and on the 27th, loaded it up. Well, fuck. Atomfall is a bad game for many reasons, and the endless crashing is surprisingly not even the biggest problem. After some sort of disaster at a nuclear power plant, the entire surrounding area has been quarantined, and the people trapped inside are left under military occupation. You wake up inside a bunker within the quarantine zone, unsure of who you are or how you got there, and by exploring leads throughout the quarantine, you attempt to find a way out, imploring the help of a number of different characters, all with different motivations, if you so choose to. In a way, the premise is very similar to Stalker, an apocalyptic survival game from 2007. Both games see you waking up with amnesia inside some sort of quarantine zone while you find clues as to who you are and why you're there. While Stalker is based around the Chernobyl exclusion zone, created after the Chernobyl disaster of 1986, Atomfall is based around two less known nuclear reactors known as the Windscale Piles that were the subject of a lesser known nuclear disaster called the Windscale Fire that caused at least 100 people to die of cancer. Now, I've not played all the Stalker games yet, but I've beaten the first, and I'm plodding along through the second. And I'm going to be completely honest, not a fan. What the fuck? What the fuck? The original games feel like total shit to play, suffering from a common issue of early 2000s FPS titles, that being bullets rarely hit where you're aiming. Despite their age, however, it's very apparent that Atomfall took a lot of influence from these older titles. There is a new game in the series out called Stalker 2 that dropped last year, and while it looks much more modernized, I haven't gotten a chance to play it yet. But if you'd like me to break down that game, I wouldn't be opposed to trying it, so let me know in the comments. Atomfall has 3 different categories of difficulty to let you customize your experience to your liking. You can have exploration on the highest difficulty, which removes the compass and quest markers, which honestly didn't feel too bad. You can also adjust the combat difficulty as well as survival difficulty, which affects enemy difficulty and item discovery. It works pretty well at making the game accessible to people who just want to play it for the story, which is by far the best part. Another thing to note going into this review is that I beat the entire game on the hardest difficulty. I did eventually lower the exploration difficulty to help streamline my progress, else I'd be wandering the world for days, and that's not a good way to write timely reviews. I also beat every alternate ending for the game after the fact, lowering the difficulty after my first playthrough to not only make the process faster, but also to understand the different feel the game has when you aren't playing on ball crushing mode. And with that, there will be spoilers ahead, so let's break this shit down. The game starts as you wake up in a bunker, unsure of who you are, where you are, or how you got there. An injured man in a hazmat suit asks for your help tending his wounds. He explains that you're in the quarantine zone around the Windscale atom plant that he claims is the cause of everything that's gone wrong. This is when you're taught the basics of crafting. The game has a very simplified material crafting system where instead of picking up a ton of random shit that you have to break down like in other games, you just get the material for whatever you pick up. Find an empty bottle, that's glass. Find some scotch or whiskey, that's alcohol. The simplified crafting is serviceable, but it's not the most fleshed out. Pretty much only used to craft bandages or a number of liquids that clear status effects and give resistances, as well as like 6 different types of bomb. Everything is also locked behind crafting recipes you need to find in the game. After helping your new science buddy, he tells you that the key to figuring out what's going on is to find the interchange. We aren't really sure what that is at this point, but it's the only lead we have, and he gives us a modified key card that should get us inside whatever the interchange is. We use the key card to get out of the bunker, which just begs the question, how the fuck did we get in here in the first place if you need a modified key card to get out? In the next room, we're introduced to the basics of the melee combat system. That is to say, the entire melee combat system. Being so basic, you have a grand total of 3 actions available: light attack, a heavy attack, and a kick. And this is one of my biggest problems with the game. I'm a huge fan of Dying Light, and I also just happened to be playing it on stream around the time Atomfall came out. It has one of the best melee focused combat systems you will find in any video game, and I'll be referencing it later when we get more into the flaws of the combat system. After leaving the bunker, you get a really nice view of the map you're about to explore, but the first thing to catch your eye is a bright red phone booth, and as you approach, the phone begins ringing. If you choose to pick it up, this is what you'll hear.
Oberon must die. Oberon must die.
「Oberon, Oberon, Oberon must die. Oberon, Oberon must die.
'Oberon, Oberon must die. 'Oberon 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 must die. '
We aren't really sure what this means or who the person on the phone is, but Oberon becomes another finding that'll affect the questions we can ask people later. The game's quest system is based around leads, bits of information you can choose to follow or not. This can be the location of stashes, NPCs, bunkers, or other points of interest. Heading northeast, you'll run into a hobo who you can ask about what's going on. He explains that a few years back, something happened at the nuclear power plant across the way, and there's been strange happenings ever since, and barely any sanity left in the quarantine zone. He tells you if you want to know more, he knows a trader named Molly who's set up not too far, and marks it on your map, another lead. If you instead decide to head directly east, you'll find a rundown bridge, where you can acquire your first melee weapon, a cricket bat. Remember guys, this is England. Bottle of water and whatnot. We also see our first non-tutorial enemy, and start to feel that combat lacking. There is no dodging, no block, and no parrying. This doesn't feel too awful yet, as we only have one enemy to deal with. It doesn't feel the best, but it doesn't feel the worst. I'm sure as long as there aren't too many enemies at once, this should work just fine. If you go back up to the bridge, you'll find a bunker door, and immediately upon entering, we find a flashlight, or as British people call it, a torch. This is one of the 3 general tools you can find in the game, and it doesn't take up an inventory slot, though the beam isn't very strong, and you also can't hold anything else while you have it out, leaving you practically defenseless. This bunker is where you'll run into your first feral, as they're called. They appear to be some sort of mutant creature similar to the feral ghouls you see in the Fallout series. They remain in a dormant state until you attack them, or if you get too close, and they can put out quite a bit of damage while stacking a status effect called Infected. There's actually no way right now to see what happens when this effect stacks up, because no matter what difficulty you're on, this feral will absolutely destroy you in as little as 3 hits. It's also worth noting that they seem to be stuck in some kind of fungal growth that lets off a blue glow. In this bunker, you'll also find your first gun, but don't get too excited. There aren't any fucking bullets. We also find our first storage container, a device called the pneumatic dispatch tube. Now I know these are real things in real life, a lot of countries in Europe still use them, but the first thing that came to mind when I saw this dispatch tube was We Happy Few, another British melee-based survival game that's also bad. Instead of having a weight system like a lot of survival games, you instead have a small as fuck inventory that can only hold 4 large weapons and 12 assorted items. Anything from health and status items, small arms like the pistol or one-handed melee weapons, explosives, or whatever else you pick up. The small inventory really becomes a problem down the line, and you'd think that the pneumatic tubes would be the solution. But there are only 10 of these in the entire open world. It's really annoying that there was obviously some thought put into having some kind of storage system to balance inventory space, but it was executed so poorly, it's almost pointless. You also find your first training stimulant here. These are the game's skill points, which you can use to purchase a very lackluster set of skills. Not only are the skills not that great, but they're also locked behind finding manuals throughout the world to unlock the ability to even purchase the skills. So not only do you have to find the skill points, but you have to find the skills, the former of which can abundantly be found in these orange bard crates left by the British Atomic Research Division, while the latter are way more scarce, there being only 11 locations you can find these manuals in. It's really bad. They probably should have just done a simple skill tree, which is a more natural way of locking abilities behind progression and exploration. Continuing back in the direction of the first enemy, we discover a key, along with a note from someone named Agravain, directing the letter's recipient, who died in a plane crash, to the Slatendale train yard, to some sort of locked stash. The name Agravain actually comes from British folklore. Agravain is the nephew of King Arthur and member of the Knights of the Round Table, but right now there's no way of knowing if the name Agravain has any thematic connections to this unknown character we're finding notes from. We also see the entrance to a slate mine, and upon entering, we run into another of the game's many issues: swarm enemies. These are small enemies that attack you in large groups, and they are scattered throughout the game in different forms: bats, rats, crows, even fish. It's stupid, it's annoying, and on harder modes, it's an unavoidable loss to a vital amount of health. You don't even get anything for killing them, they're just a big fuck you. We find a man named Reg Stanfield, and he tells us he used to work in the slate mines. While he claims to not know much, he's able to lay out the land for us a little, explaining Slatendale, the area that we start in, is full of bandits, or outlaws as they're called, and this particular tunnel has a path that takes you to the Slatendale mine. He also explains there's another path that takes you to Skemore, an area controlled by the soldiers. While this is useful information, the most interesting thing he mentions is that he's happy to talk to someone who isn't a voice in in his head. If we pry into this, he explains that he can hear voices that usually tell him when someone's coming, and that it usually gives him time to hide. But the voices didn't warn him about us. He says they whisper to him about secret places he can't have known about on his own. If we sympathetically pry more, he explains that the voices spoke of something called the interchange, a facility of some sort built by the government after the discovery of something deeper inside the mine. He hopes that if you find and open whatever the interchange is, the voices will leave him alone. We aren't really sure at this point what the voices are, but we now know the interchange is some sort of facility built after they found something inside the mine. Reg has no clue where the entrance to said facility is, but he does know about a convoy that was ambushed by outlaws that he believes was headed to the interchange. He marks it on our map, and before we leave, we can trade with him to get the metal detector, the second tool you can find in the game. The metal detector is a very simple mechanic that sort of works like the anomaly detector in Stalker Clear Sky. You can use it to find buried caches throughout the world, and it's probably the least bad mechanic in the entire game. Reg mentioned two different paths we can go, a path back to Slatendale or one to Skemore, through an opening in the barrier put up by soldiers. He said not to try Skemore, so I immediately headed there, only to be greeted by this guy. Yeah, I'm gonna fuck right off. Heading to the Slatendale mines, we find a camp of outlaws near a radio tower. Now there's a direct path in, or this very obviously handcrafted stealth entrance into the base. I of course took the stealth route, and immediately fucked it up. Now, even if I hadn't fucked it up, the stealth in this game is practically non-existent. Enemies will pretty much immediately enter combat mode the moment you're in sight in a restricted area. These specific pieces of grass are the only place where you aren't visible. Note how it is placed in the middle of fucking nowhere. Usually in stealth games, you need some sort of connecting path to be able to remain out of sight. Look at the stretch of path I have to travel with the slowest crouch speed in all of gaming to get to the uselessly placed stealth grass. No matter what you try to do, these outlaws are going to beat the shit out of you. And this is when you start to realize there's no hotkey to heal yourself in the middle of combat, which means you have to go into your inventory and manually click on a healing item while you're being attacked. The game doesn't pause in your inventory either, no matter what difficulty you're on. The fact you have almost no evasive maneuvers makes the game just feel like turbo aids, especially since you're almost exclusively fighting groups of people in the open world. And it doesn't help that in these groups, there's at least one or two people who will have guns, while a crowd of melee attackers are rushing you. The best way to handle groups of people is to take out anyone with guns first, and you can usually prevent enemies rushing you by pointing a loaded gun at them. But once you fire, they will take the opportunity to push you, knowing that you have to take a second to rechamber around. Enemies attacking you while you rechamber is a pretty interesting mechanic to have in a game with a terrible combat system. It just feels like no one on the team actually played the game to see if it was fun, because this feels horrendous. It's also made worse by the fact that while there's also an actual stamina system that acts like your heart rate rising, it has absolutely no effect on how many swings you can do with your melee weapon, because no matter how much stamina you have, you can only swing 4 times before the animation stops, which leaves you vulnerable to attack. The heavy attack is no better, because not only does it take forever to charge up, but once the animation starts, the attack has to happen, and if you're hit mid-swing, it's cancelled. We can compare this to Dying Light to see why it feels so bad. In that game, heavy attacks are actually locked behind a skill tree, but once you acquire it, you're able to hold the attack until you're ready to swing. You can also kick if needed, which cancels the attack. In Atomfall, not only can you not cancel an attack with a kick, but it also takes forever to be able to kick after a heavy attack, which leaves you vulnerable if there's multiple enemies, or if you miss, which does happen a lot, because guess what? The enemies have a dodge. They can fucking backstep, but I can't. What the hell? This camp of outlaws is probably the first place you'll find a rifle. There are only a handful of firearms in the entire game, and even less that can be found in Slatendale. These include a single barrel break action shotgun, a single shot bolt action rifle, the revolver we found earlier, and the best of the bunch, the Lee Enfield rifle. You can also sometimes find a double barrel shotgun, but they're more rare. While the Lee Enfield is also a bolt action rifle, it has an internal magazine that holds up to 5 rounds, making it the best rifle so far. All of these weapons are in a severely rusted state, which affects their speed and and the amount of damage they do. There is a way to upgrade them, but that won't come until way later into the game. No matter the difficulty you're on, a firearm is still very effective at taking out any human enemy, especially if headshot. Making our way to the train yard, we find the stash left by Agravain, as well as a note left behind with orders. It explains that the convoy they are part of is gone, and that their orders remain the same. Discover what happened to their comrades 5 years ago, when a blackout caused by the wind scale disaster cut all communication in the area. The note explains their last known location was in Casterfell Woods, and that a sewer tunnel nearby leads there. With this new lead, we can choose to go directly into the sewer or check out some of the other leads. We've worked our way close enough to Molly, the trader we were told about, so we might as well make a quick stop. Talking to Molly, we learn that the scientists kept everything happening at the Windscale plant secret until the day it exploded. She also tells you that the outlaws nearby found a door they can't get open, marked with the text interchange. Molly marks it on her map, and we now have an idea where the entrance to the interchange is. And she says if you trade with her, she'll give you more info on stuff she's seen. You can trade her for the stealth and bow manuals, both of which are very expensive and both of which are useless. As I explained earlier, stealth is basically pointless, and we don't have a bow yet, nor can you ever craft one. Now let's take a quick look at the lackluster abilities that these manuals unlock. The bow manual is not necessarily too useless, but we just don't have that weapon right now. There's bow focus. It gives you bullet time, but only for bows. Not the worst. Draw control. It keeps your hands from shaking while holding the bow drawn. And then draw speed, which just increases how fast you draw the bow. Also not bad. Too bad I don't have a bow yet. The stealth ones are way more useless, because the stealth system is just bad. First up, there's surprise attack. Deal more damage to unaware enemies. In most games with stealth, this shit comes free with your Xbox. Then there's quiet movement, which reduces footstep noise. I'm not really sure how useful that is though when line of sight is broken anyways. Quiet takedown makes your takedowns less noisy. This should also come free with your Xbox because it's a fucking takedown. By default, a takedown makes so much noise, everyone and their dog is alerted to your position the moment you snap someone's neck. Also note how it says less noise and not no noise. Doesn't give me a lot of confidence. All the stealth skills are not only useless, but are usually things you would have by default in any other game with stealth mechanics. Personally, I'd replace these with the ability to see enemy footprints through walls while crouched, the ability to throw a rock or something to draw people's attention away, which I know comes free with your Xbox and a lot of other games, but just whatever. And maybe something that would increase the time it takes to get spotted by someone. Back to Molly, she has something called an atomic battery, and not really sure what that is. We're gonna leave it be for now. The key she had drew my attention, so I purchased that, not really knowing what it was for. And after making a trade, she gives us more information on the nearby convoy that was ambushed. The attackers were a group known as the Druids, crazy masked people who live in the Casterfell Woods. This is the first we've heard of the Druids so far, and we'll probably be running into them when we get to the forest. She explains that after it was attacked, she saw one member of the convoy escape alive and head towards the train yard. This small bit of info allows us to deduce that the lone survivor of the convoy is this Agravain person who left supplies stashed at the train yard, and whose orders are to discover what happened to their comrades in Casterfell Woods. If you learn about the convoy from Molly, you'll get the same quest marker as you do when you find the note in the crashed helicopter. Even more interestingly, if you were to head directly to Molly instead of east into the bunker and the mine, she'll actually offer both the flashlight and the metal detector. The game makes sure that no matter which way you decide to go, you'll eventually find the tools you need to progress. Now, being aware of a possible entrance to the interchange, we can decide to head straight for it, or go into the sewer to find out more about this Agravain person. I of course headed in the complete opposite direction of our main goal, to instead learn more about the world and the story. Heading west towards the convoy, we see the key Molly gave us was a secondary entrance to the sewer. A note is left behind, implying that this is going to be like some sort of safe house or something. We'll check that out later though. Reaching the convoy, we see the bridge blown out by whoever attacked them. And doing a bit of investigating, we learn that this specific incursion into the zone included 2 helicopters that were specially equipped to try and handle the interference coming from the zone. It obviously didn't work as we saw earlier. We also get info about the leader of the convoy being a female civilian, who apparently seemed to know what she was doing. We can assume this is Agravain, meaning the person we'll be looking for in Casterfell Woods is a woman. Exploring further, we can find a soldier's corpse full of arrows, and a note left behind that directs us to the same interchange door Molly informed us about. The game so far is doing a fairly good job at connecting all the quests together, no matter which direction you decide to go. I count 4 different leads to the interchange door in Slatendale, the first area in the game. I really wish it was more fun to play because I was honestly enjoying uncovering the mysteries of the quarantine zone at my own pace. Let me know in the comments, are you finding this story as interesting as I did? And if so, would you subject yourself to the shitty gameplay to learn the ending? No matter what your answer is though, I'm here either way to give you all the lore you need without wasting 62 gigabytes of space and 30 hours of your life. This is because I'm cool and swag. Atomfall immediately gets an extra point for having a waterfall with the secret entrance behind it. And inside the cave, we find a dead soldier and a note explaining that the survivors were taken by masked people to a castle. We know from Molly that this group is called the Druids, so we can assume this castle will be in Casterfell Woods, but we don't have any explanation yet for why they would attack a convoy headed into the quarantine zone. Before we head in the direction of the forest to learn more, there are two more things to explore in Slatendale: an outlaw camp near the convoy and the L6 bunker. The outlaw camp can be found through a small cave near the convoy wreckage, which is actually how I discovered it. This is also where we can find that good view of the windscale plant that they used in the release trailer. And the L6 bunker can be discovered by the hobo we meet earlier if you pry him for more information. The outlaw cave acts as a standard, if not boring, dungeon. Because line of sight is fucked, there was practically no chance for me to sneak, because one of the outlaws saw me the minute I walked in. After clearing the cave, you find the melee combat manual, as well as a bard supply crate that has more training stimulants. These skills aren't actually completely useless. One increases the power of heavy attacks, while another increases melee damage in general. Not really sure if they stack. There's another one that decreases the stamina costs of all melee attacks, and we're not even going to bother touching that one, because as I explained earlier, you can only swing a melee weapon 4 times no matter how much stamina you have. Not too far from the outlaw cave, we find the body of someone named Jackson, as well as a note addressed to someone named Powell. Jackson says Powell was right about Helen being infected. He explains that she started talking like the Druids about voices in the soil, and that he woke up to find she had ran off to join them. We now know from this info that whatever the infection buildup from the ferals is, it's most likely related to the voices people are hearing, and has something to do with the Druids in the forest. We also now have confirmation that someone other than the miner Reg has heard voices in their head. This could also have something to do with why they attacked the convoy. The last place to check out is the L6 bunker. We know from Reg, Molly, and the hobo that these bunkers were built by the scientists after the construction of whatever the interchange was, so we're sure to find information on what's going on inside. You'll notice that there's another pneumatic dispatch tube near the entrance. The game tries to keep these diegetic to the world you're in, as they seem to only be available in places that the scientists built. But like I explained earlier, it just doesn't work having only a handful of locations to dump your inventory unevenly spread throughout the world. We can see the bunker is full of ferals, and this is the second location that we found in. It's probably no coincidence that both locations we found them in have been bunkers created by the windscale scientists. I took the opportunity to test how effective grenades are on the stationary targets. If your grenade doesn't dissolve into the ether, they're very effective against the ferals, though the noise from the explosion can wake up others, which you then need to handle at closer range. Both the military grenade and the sticky bomb seem to handle them in one shot, but the nail bomb doesn't. Molotovs are super effective, but something interesting happens when a feral is hit by one, which we'll get into in a minute. While taking in my surroundings, I noticed these little openings that were designed as if the game wanted me to attempt stealth. Maybe there's a way to avoid running into ferals that can get me through the entire bunker. Well, fuck. Yeah, so that didn't work. I even tried taking the quiet movement skill, and while it did let me barely scoot past this guy, there's still no way I could grab even half of the notes and items in this bunker without alerting the ferals. Line of sight being broken doesn't even apply to these guys, because they instead have an activation radius. Just more evidence nobody thought out or tested the stealth. After clearing the ferals, we can explore the bunker, where we find a number of bard crates, and a bit of additional information on what these ferals are. A note near the entrance explains that the last inhabitants of the bunker escaped from somewhere referred to as medical when all hell was breaking loose. Someone named Dr. Fisher, who escaped with them, started showing early signs of infection, and the writer explains that there was nothing left they could do but wait and observe. We then find another note that explains Dr. Fisher turned within just a few days, and was put down by the writer with a gunshot to the head. The note mentions somebody named Alan, as the writer wonders if he really did have all the answers to the infection. The occupants of the bunker never discovered any answers, as they were all infected and began turning, and quarantine protocol prevented anyone venturing out to look for this Alan. We now have a bit clearer picture of what caused these ferals. Some sort of incident at the Windscale plant caused the infection, and the scientists who were exposed to whatever caused it began turning into these creatures. There's also another note we find scrawled on a piece of paper. Change inside. Never quiet. Us, 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 us. This note implies that whatever causes the ferals is also connected to those voices people are hearing in the soil. And by dumb luck, I actually confirmed this connection. If you throw a Molotov at a feral, it's very effective at killing them, but they'll also shoot a blue ball of goo in your direction, which immediately infects you upon landing, and this is what happens. The moment you're infected, you begin to hear a voice in your head that wants you to join them and become part of the voice. And we now know whatever causes the ferals is connected to the voices, which are in some way connected to both the people in Casterfell Woods and the interchange. Perhaps whatever caused the infection has also seeped into the ground around the plant and is causing people in the quarantine zone to hear voices. The voices could be connecting infected people within the zone, which is how the minor Reg would be able to tell when he needed to hide as people were approaching. This also explains why he couldn't tell we were coming, as we started the game quarantined inside of a bunker. Now turning our attention back to the L6 bunker, this is where we get our first taste of the annoyance of rat swarms. These things come out of nowhere and attack you while stacking a poison status effect. They swarm in specific rooms throughout the game and can be dealt with by either crushing them with kicks or any melee weapon. There's also a lure bomb. Lure bomb? I ain't able to say that word very well.
Lure.
Lure bomb. Yeehaw, partner. It's supposed to draw swarms to it before exploding, but it just doesn't fucking work. If you're out of the reach of rats, basically any elevation above the plane they run on, they'll go back into their hidey holes until you're back in range. And if you try to throw a lure bomb from a higher elevation, it almost works, the rats coming out of their hole and approaching it, except they aren't given anywhere near enough time to swarm it before it explodes. The only way I could kind of get it to work was to throw the bomb at my feet while I was running away. And even that doesn't really count because they're still just chasing me. You could do the same thing with any other type of bomb and it would be just as effective. There could, however, be some kind of lore implication behind these rats and maybe the swarms in general, because if you look closely, the rats actually have blue eyes, which means they could have the same infection as the ferals. Now that we've explored all we need to in Slatendale, it's time to get through the sewers to follow our leads on Agravain. The sewers are a very underdeveloped part of the game and acts as a faster route to other areas of the map than walking on foot would be. There are a handful of outlaws patrolling the main sewer hub, and I tried to sneak around them, but it of course failed, since the stealth in this game is a joke. You'll also find two sources of infinitely spawning rats that can be stopped by breaking the nests they are spawning out of. Besides that, there really isn't much in here. There's a locked door to some sort of control room, and that key we got earlier from Molly turned out to be quite anticlimactic, because it was just another entrance into the upper part of the sewer, netting us no actual benefit. With that, we head towards Casterfell Woods, and on the way we find a note, presumably left by outlaws, explaining that the Druids came through the sewers and attacked the convoy, taking an atomic battery from the wreckage. The outlaws want that battery because it's valuable salvage, so they've sent people to sneak into the castle in the woods to steal it. With this info, we learn that we'll probably be running into a castle at some point in our journey into the forest. Coming out of the sewers into the woods, we almost start in the complete center of the map. There are quite a few directions we can go from here, and it's a bit intimidating. And before I can devise a plan, I realize there are enemies pretty close by, and after dispatching them, I notice this is probably the faction of enemy known as the Druids, as some wear masks on their face. I see another phone booth in the distance, and after taking out another group of Druids, the phone rings and we hear this on the other end.
You have experienced the woods. You should avoid the woods when possible. The woods are dangerous. Be careful.
We aren't really sure how the voice on the phone knew we were here, or why it would warn us it's dangerous. On the side of the phone booth, we find a note left by someone named Mother Jago. She urges anyone lost to come to her at the old mine for natural tonics and remedies. We are headed in that direction anyways to find Agravain, but before we do, we can finally pick up our first bow and give it a test drive. Of course, it feels really bad to use. Not only is the draw time terrible, but the controls for it are awful. You need to hold right click before you're able to draw with left click, and sometimes it just doesn't register the right click. Draw time is also affected by how high your heart rate is, unless you take the draw control skill. Without at least 2 of the bow skills, you basically always lose against any more than one other archer, because the moment you're hit by someone else, your draw is cancelled. I'd say you're better off using a firearm than a bow, but there is absolutely no way to craft ammo for any weapon in this game, including the bow. But deeper in the woods, there are no enemies that drop firearm ammo, so if you're gonna stay stocked up, you're gonna need to at least switch to the bow in this area. Heading east from the phone booth, we stumble upon another crashed helicopter, and we can assume it's the second helicopter brought in by the convoy. Inside, we find an audio log left by someone named Dr. Garrow. She explains she was the only survivor of the crash and headed to a nearby village to see if anyone there was still alive. The village is another area of the map that we'll get to later, but for now, we'll continue heading towards this Agravain. On my way there, I ran into a group of Druids that I had to take out, and I realized I was close enough to the old mine that I might as well stop by. When we get there, we find this Mother Jago. She seems harmless enough, but she says she has to lay low because the soldiers in the village don't care for her traditional practices, as she calls them. We aren't sure what these practices are, but she says when the soldiers first rolled into town, she left to the woods to avoid them throwing her in jail, and she says she likes it here because she feels closer to the earth. If we ask more about the woods, she explains the Druids live in the thickest part, held up in an old castle. They hear voices in the soil and worship them like some sort of god. And if we ask more about these voices, she says the soil speaks to those who listen, and that ever since the disaster at the atom plant, the voices have been much louder and angrier. Mother Jago consents we're interested in learning more about the voices, and says she'll explain more if we get back her herbalism book from the Druid's castle. She says it's nothing worth killing over, implying stealth is an option, but I'm gonna press X to doubt that one immediately. We can also trade with her for poison antidotes and a recipe to craft said antidote. It's pretty obvious Mother Jago appears to have been into some sort of witchcraft-like activity before the Windscale disaster, as she says the voices have always been in the soil, and have only gotten louder after the creation of the Windscale plant. We aren't really sure if we can trust her, but we're planning on checking out the castle anyways. We now continue on to learn who this Agravain is, discovering a bunker nearby, and upon entering, we see who we can assume is Agravain. She says her name is Joyce Tanner, and she explains she was assigned to head an expeditionary convoy into the zone a few months ago. She also mentions the same Dr. Garrow we found an audio log of at the second helicopter crash site. They were both drafted as specialists to explore the quarantine, and Dr. Garrow was apparently a big name in the area before the disaster happened. While we aren't sure what Garrow's specialization is, Tanner says she's a communications expert. She believes she was the only survivor of the convoy, escaping to the train yard after the Druid attack, before heading into the woods to look for a way of communicating with the outside. After weeks of going through data in this bunker, she's still no closer to figuring out how to get a signal. She also mentions while poking around, she found a lot of mentions about something called Oberon, but says she isn't really sure what it is. Tanner says if she could get into the central hub that all the bunker data is reported to, the interchange, then she could probably get further. We can then ask her if she knows any entrances into the interchange, and this is when we learn that not only is there a potential entrance in Slatendale, but there's also one in Casterfell Woods, a bit east of the sewer tunnel we came through. She says if the interchange was powered on, she could call for extraction. This is all the information Tanner is willing to give a stranger, as she doesn't feel like she can trust us with the finer details of her mission. But there are a couple problems with her story. She made no reference to her being someone named Agravain, or anything to do with the orders we discovered by following her trail. The orders left at the train yard said the mission was to discover what happened to the comrades they lost contact with after the Windscale disaster. She only says the convoy was headed into the zone as part of a research expedition, nothing about these missing comrades. We also found orders at the convoy wreckage that stated 2 goals the convoy was going to split up to complete, one being to find the interchange, and the other to head to Windham Village to parley with any residents still alive. These orders directly contradict what Joyce Tanner has told us, as they state nothing about coming to Casterfell Woods. Druids. The other tip-off that something else was afoot is the fact we found a note leading us to Agravain within the first crashed helicopter. But how could this note have these coordinates before the crash and the attack on the convoy? Unless these coordinates were picked out beforehand as part of a predetermined secret objective Agravain and her comrades had that differed from the reason the convoy was sent in. In this bunker, we can find a bard crate, as well as the crafting recipe for the makeshift grenade. My guess is that these are basically a craftable version of a military grenade, but cost way less glue than the sticky bomb to make. We also have another dispatch tube to drop our items in. Going out the inner bunker door, we end up on a ledge that overlooks a field. We can find another bard crate here before killing a few druids to explore further. This is where we get our first real run-in with the beehive swarms. They're very similar to the rat swarms, though these specific ones are programmed not to attack you until you approach the body in the middle of the grove of trees, at which point they all attack at once. It's pretty dumb, as you can just shoot the hives before approaching, nullifying the entire encounter. I took the opportunity to test the lure bomb again, and again it failed miserably. After taking out the swarm, you can loot the body in the center of the grove, which has on it probably the strongest gun in the game, the JM3 Bullpup. This gun is based off the Janssen EM2, a rifle meant to replace the Lee Enfield in the 50s. It saw very limited use before being phased out in favor of the FN FAL. In this alternate history Britain, the JM3 seems to have stayed the standard. So far, the fastest firearm we had was the revolver, but the JM3 is automatic, meaning you're able to lay out way more bullets than before, if you could fucking hold any. Using the gun as an automatic weapon doesn't actually work very well, since you can't even hold 3 magazines worth of ammunition, but it works great for taking out large groups faster than the Enfield, especially if you land headshots. This grove is a part of a new location we've discovered, the garden center. Entering the main structure, we find 2 rats' nests, and after taking care of them, we can find a greenhouse key inside the building. Opening the greenhouse, we find a note from someone hoping Agravain was sending a rescue operation. The note says they took shelter from the Druids inside a cellar behind the main building. Investigating the cellar, we find no survivors, but do find more notes that give us a better glimpse into what these comrades were up to. The first note explains that the group's operation to infiltrate the Windscale facility seemed successful, but not long after, there was a huge explosion at the plant. The note explains this explosion led to the British walling off the area, which trapped them inside the quarantine zone. We can tell by the wording of this note that these comrades we've been hearing about are Russian communists who were trying to infiltrate the British atom plant to expose something they were hiding from the world. We can presume this is Oberon. The writer explains that someone named Comrade Sergeant Kozlov found the cellar where they all planned to hide, in hopes Agravain would send in an extraction team. We now know why Joyce Tanner didn't mention anything about searching for her comrades. Pre-disaster, they were a group of commies attempting to infiltrate the British Atomic Research Division. We don't know exactly what they were looking for or what their special operation was outside of infiltration, but it doesn't sound like they were the cause of the disaster, since the note claims their special operation failed. Joyce Tanner having the codename Agravain with her comrades makes a lot of sense now. As I explained earlier, Agravain is the name of the nephew of King Arthur, and a member of the Knights of the Round Table. In Arthurian legend, Agravain is known to have betrayed Lancelot and Guinevere by exposing their affair, which eventually leads to the fall of Camelot. In a similar way, Joyce Tanner is betraying her country and is working with her communist comrades to expose whatever the British have been up to inside the Windscale plant. We find another note from a few months later. One member from the group named Nichev had been dragged off by the Druids and presumably killed. Kozlov believed they should find a new hiding spot farther from the Druids, still hopeful of a rescue attempt by Agravain. In another note, a few months later, the writer says he started hearing voices in the soil. Kozlov left to a potential hiding spot in Skemore, a place called the Brinsop Manor, but the writer decided to stay, no longer wanting to leave as they gave in to the voices. We know there's some sort of collective aspect to the voices, as it urges more people to become part of it. It would make sense that a commie would decide to give in to such voices. We now have a lead that takes us all the way to Skemore. For now, we've discovered all we can about Agravain and her comrades, and we can now focus on Mother Jago's request to retrieve her book as we explore deeper into the forest. On our way to the castle, we stumble upon a boatyard. There isn't really anything here besides a note. Someone simply referred to as Boss is dead set on trying to escape by boat, and the writer believes there might be something in the mire, since no one ever comes back. There are no leads from this note, but we're going to talk about it again at the end of the video. Continuing back towards the sewer entrance, I took the opportunity to purchase the disarm traps skill, though it's really not necessary if you don't want to take it, because most traps can be escaped before they cause injury. I picked up a trail leading towards the castle and headed that direction, but I was quickly greeted by a massive wooden visage of a person looking down from a plateau. As we head deeper, we also see scrawlings of a symbol all over the place. We aren't really sure what these symbols are or what they mean, but they look pretty similar to a combination of the Nordic symbol for divine consciousness and the alchemical rune for the element of earth. The connection there is also pretty strong, as the collective voices everyone's hearing from the soil could be interpreted as a kind of divine consciousness. We stumble upon a strange landmark called the Stone Circle. In the center there's a note describing someone finally hearing the voices and being happy to finally be able to serve whatever change the Druids are striving for. It's pretty obvious this cult is on some fuck shit. We can even find corpses crucified on the same symbols drawn throughout the forest. Fighting our way towards the castle, we can find a pamphlet explaining some of the history. We learn that Casterfell Keep was built around 1325 in response to the Great Raid of 1322 during the First Scottish War. It never actually saw combat and was later renovated into a folly, which is a type of decorative ruin, and as we can see, the Druids later commandeered it for their cult. You can also find the recipe for the nail bomb buried around here. The nail bomb is probably the most useless of the bunch, applying a bleed effect as its main selling point. Problem is, the bleed effect is pretty much pointless. The arrows apply it too, but it's way easier to just fire another arrow and finish the job, rather than wait for someone to bleed to death. So why use this bomb at all, when you can just use one that kills in a single hit? Approaching the castle, I of course tried to sneak in and immediately failed. There's even a section outside that looks as if they tried to create a stealthy entrance onto the castle grounds. But again, the stealth system just doesn't work. Exploring the area, I found a locked door and a note. The note explains a novice follower decided to venture off to where he thought the voices wanted him to go, and the key to the door is on his person. Interestingly, this note doesn't provide a lead or a quest marker, but does provide coordinates to where we need to go. My guess is this is probably a bug no one noticed, but it's not really that big of a deal. Heading to that location, we find what I call the Turbo Age Swamp. The Turbo Age Swamp is home to the red plant that shoots poison barbs at you. That's its full legal name until we learn otherwise. There are very few of this enemy in the game, and they're really annoying, but if you have a sticky bomb, it'll take them out in one hit. After we take out the plant, however, the body is still not reachable because a blue mist permeating the air will kill you in a matter of seconds, while also stacking infection. We'll have to come back to this area when we're able to get through the blue mist. Heading back towards the castle, I decided to stop and check out this sewer tunnel entrance, similar to the one we saw in Slatendale. This door takes us to the locked control room we saw earlier, and inside there's a recipe for a Molotov, as well as a body with a note and a key to the sewer tunnel door. The note says something about the interchange needing to stay dry. This info doesn't seem to at all be important, as we already know by this point in the game that the interchange is underground. Heading the opposite direction of the Casterfell Woods exit, we can find the locked sewer door, which is the last unexplored area in the sewer. Opening it, we find literally nothing but a bard crate with one skill point in it. It's a pretty pathetic reward for the amount of hoops you have to jump through, but it's whatever. Continuing back to the castle, there's also a gas station, which houses one of the 3 puzzles I can recall throughout the entire game. When approaching the garage, pipes from the pump start spewing gas. The solution to the puzzle is to turn the 3 valves surrounding the building in the correct order. It's really simple, but still technically counts as a puzzle. But just in case it was too complicated for your little bird brain, the answer is on a piece of paper sitting on a table in the back. Through the power of permutation, we can see there are only 6 combinations you could have tried in the first place. So it's just a little dumb they decided to give you the answer anyways. The worst part is, after you solve the puzzle, the only thing you're rewarded with is a garage full of crafting supplies you can't carry because you have no items to craft, and even if you did, you lack the inventory space to hold them. After making our way back to the castle, we can choose to either enter through the basement or through the main entrance. I chose the main entrance, and there weren't many enemies on the first and second levels, nor is there too much to find, but there is a secret keyhole next to the fireplace, whose key is located in the kitchen. Using it, a secret entrance opens to the lower part of the castle, and we can quickly find Mother Jago's book in a room off to the side. We also find the most important recipe in the entire game, the Strange Tonic. This liquid cures infection and gives resistance to the buildup. Technically, infection itself doesn't have any negative side effects, but the buildup of it is usually paired with damage. And in the worst cases, we have those blue mist areas that are completely unpassable without this liquid. It's made with a material called spores, which also happen to be chilling right next to it. But something we need to note note is that although we can craft this tonic now, we can't actually harvest spores yet because the ability is locked behind a skill we haven't found, but they can be traded by Mother Jago if we really need them. Continuing down, we fight through more druids until we reach a massive hole spewing blue mist. Because I decided to come in from this angle, whoever was doing stuff on the other side of the pit got spooked. Looping back around to the basement entrance, we can sneak up on this person to see what they were doing, and it turns out they were tossing atomic batteries into the blue pit. After killing the NPC, we can see they're called a High Priestess, and we're able to retrieve the atomic battery we heard was taken from the convoy, the first one we've collected in the game. Looking down this hole, it appears full of atomic batteries. Whatever this cult is doing, it seems to revolve around the atomic energy produced at the Windscale plant, but Mother Jago said the voices in the soil existed before the atom plant was built. So how does the atomic battery relate to it at all? Returning the book to Mother Jago, we ask more about the Druids. She explains they were what's left of a group of monks that were thrown out of their monastery by Queen Elizabeth I. Even after losing their place of worship, they stayed in the area, believing the land was sacred. Historically speaking, after the establishment of the Church of England by King Henry in the 1500s, nearly 1900 monasteries were forced to close down. Queen Elizabeth I ruled after Henry, Edward, and Mary, so her closing down any monasteries is half a century removed from her father's actions. Whatever the reason for taking their monastery, these pagan monks continued to worship whatever god they believed to be in the soil for hundreds of years. Mother Jago rewards us with 3 learning stimulants, explaining they were created by the scientists at the atom plant. According to her, they help open the mind to learn things much quicker, but she can tell what we truly want to learn is how to escape this place. She says the first step to escaping is understanding, and if we trust her, she'll send us somewhere we might find answers. She tells us to head to a place called the Speaking Cave, which is right next to the Stone Circle landmark. She gives us a small offering, shaped exactly like the symbol used by the Druids. All she wants us to do is leave the offering in the cave, and claims as long as we have it, the Druids in the cave should leave us alone. It's very obvious by this point that Mother Jago is a part of this religious cult, so we ask why she made us infiltrate the Druid castle, which led to dozens of deaths of her fellow cult members. She says she needed to test us and make sure we were more resourceful than the average Joe, because we'll need to be if we're to make any progress uncovering the truth. Mother Jago also says the Druids don't actually care about dying that much, saying the religion isn't theirs or hers, but is instead the earth from which everybody comes from and one day will return. This would sound like some standard hippy dippy shit if it weren't for the fact she's literally talking about murder not being that bad, but we'll continue following what she says to try to learn more about what's going on. Heading back to the Speaking Cave, we can use the opportunity to make a stop by the Turboade swamp that we should be able to access thanks to the strange tonic. There's another plant enemy here as well that acts as a sort of landmine. If you get close enough for it to open, you can shoot it so it blows up at a safe distance. We also find the corpse of a scientist with a note on him explaining his name is Dr. Cooper and he was trying to keep himself from forgetting everybody else, including a Dr. Powell, who we heard about in a note back in Slatendale. We learn he was fighting voices of fellow scientists who were dead, while looking for Mother Jago, who he believed could help silence the voices. We now know that people aren't just hearing disembodied voices of the living, like some sort of collective hive mind, but are apparently also hearing the voices of the dead. From this side of the swamp, we can also see some sort of overgrown manor that we'll check out later. But for now, we grab the key and head back to the castle to open the locked door, and the only thing we find behind it is another bard crate with a single skill point. Another lackluster reward for all the hoops we had to jump through. I think I'm seeing a pattern forming. Reaching the stone circle, we enter the Speaking Cave, and inside we find Mother Jago was correct. No one is attacking us, but everyone inside the cave has glowing blue eyes. Inside we can find a single note explaining how the Druids are grateful to Mother Jago because her tonic lets them become close to the voices in the soil without their bodies being affected. So that means the strange tonic that gets us through infected areas is being used by the Druids and is possibly causing their glowing eyes. It also seems to be the thing that's keeping them from turning into ferals like the scientists from the bunkers. We aren't sure if it affects us at all though, because no one in the game brings it up. Reaching the center of the cave, we find another visage, this one with a dead body in it, whose eyes glow like everyone else in the cave. When we leave the offering at its foot, a voice begins speaking from it.
You have come to us in us. It was inevitable. Your place is with us.
It's super strange that a dead person is talking to us inside of this visage, but the voices say death is an old thought whose time is done. Whatever the disaster was caused this fungal growth, whose spores are infecting people in the quarantine zone and connecting their minds together and even to the dead. This all supports the idea that the voice is some kind of divine consciousness that everyone being infected is connecting to, and Mother Jago is somehow using the spores from this fungus to create the tonic the Druids are using. The voices tell us we should listen to Mother Jago, and if we respond in any negative manner, the entire cave aggroes on us. Our best bet, even if we aren't sure about this, is to play along. Before we leave, we can find another bard crate in a room behind the visage, and after we exit the cave, Mother Jago is waiting for us at the stone circle. She says what's happening in the quarantine zone isn't actually a disaster, but instead a salvation, a happy accident brought on by the foolish scientists who decided to meddle with things they didn't understand. When we ask more about this salvation, she says the earth itself wants to bring all humanity together in the soil. Mother Jago believes we need to repair the severed bond with the land by giving up the heathen technology created by science and return ourselves to the soil. She asks if we're ready to join the cause, and by this point, I believe we're a little too deep for a simple no to lead to anything but confrontation, so I said yes. She says there's one thing I need to do to help with this cause, something the scientists found under the plant, something she claims is divine, Oberon, needs to be found and fed. She says the scientists have done damage to it, and feeding it is the only way to heal that damage. The only way to reach Oberon, however, is to find the main science hub, the interchange, and power it on. We ask Mother Jago what Oberon is, but she says she has no idea what form it actually takes, only that the soil sings of it. She goes on to explain that the scientists came to her for help after the disaster and told her of a serum that could cause the new growth to spread like wildfire. We ask what the serum is, and she says it's actually just a stronger version of the learning stimulant we've been shooting into our bodies. Whatever the stuff is, it's made from the same thing that she wants us to find and feed to Oberon, which Mother Jago believes to be a god. We agree to help her and ask where exactly this growth serum is, and learn it'll be deep in the interchange in a tunnel underneath the medical facility. We aren't really sure what that means right now, but we'll probably figure it out by the time we get into the interchange. We're then directed to the same interchange door we learned about from Tanner, so I began heading that direction. But on the way we passed the large manor I mentioned earlier, and there's a perfectly placed hole in the garden wall we can climb through. The backyard is completely covered in booby traps, and we can even find a few bodies of outlaws who've set off a few. Near where we entered, we can find a note left for someone named Charity. It says the scientists will be back eventually, and to keep the hall in good order, as the writer plans to go for a walk nearby a stream. In the back of the garden, you can find a double-barrel shotgun to replace the single-barrel one we've had, and a locked door leading to a sunroom. On the side of the building, we can find an entrance to what's known as Datlo Hall. Inside, we find a woman named Prudence Rook, who seems to have a screw or two loose, saying she needs to prepare to accommodate the scientists returning to the hall, and keeps calling for someone named Jenks. But no one else is in the house, and everything is obviously in extreme disrepair. When asked if she's alone, Prudence says there's always tons of bard scientists coming and going, and that her sister Charity is much smarter than her and would host them in the conservatory, which is what British people call a sunroom. We know she's delusional because all the scientists have been quarantined since the disaster 5 years ago. I decided to lie and go along with her delusion, claiming to be one of these scientists, and asking to talk to her sister. She says I can have full freedom to roam the hall, but her sister can't be disturbed, and that I need to stay away from the conservatory. When we ask why, she says there are precious things inside that shouldn't be touched, and that she'll only give the key to unlock it to Jenks. I tell her Jenks is gone, and she says he only went to run an errand at the dam to the northwest. By this point, I really want to know what's in that sunroom, so I head to the dam to find Jenks. On the way, I stumble across a man with glowing eyes who isn't completely insane, named Billy Gorse. He immediately points out that he might look like one of the Druids on account of his eyes, but that he is not. For some reason, he's kept his sanity after being infected, and doesn't seem to be hearing any voices. We do get a bit more info about the Druids from him, as he claims they actually used to live on an island in the mire before the Windscale disaster, which is when they all moved into the woods. We can trade with him for both an atomic battery and the consumable skills manual. We aren't really sure what the atomic batteries are for yet, and we already found one at this point, so we'll just take note he has one and purchase the manual. The consumable skills aren't terrible, but but for the first one, Blue Fingers. This is the skill that lets you harvest spores from infected sources, like the red plant that shoots poison barbs at you. It's just something I think you should be able to do from the start. The other two are buff duration and gut health. Buff duration is self-explanatory, and gut health is just awesome. It makes it so any food you consume gives you the same damage resistance buff as painkillers would. From Billy's position, we see a logging mill we can quickly check out. Nothing really here but a note from another druid who hopes one day he'll hear the voices. Continuing on, we reach the Casterfell Dam and meet the green plant that crushes your balls. This plant is by far the stupidest in the entire game because there's no actual way to kill it. You can only temporarily disable it with enough damage to its head, but no matter what you throw at it, this fucking penis plant refuses to die. The dam is where we can find our second puzzle in the entire game. There are 3 substations, but 2 of them will electrocute you to death if you enter them. The solution to the puzzle is to pull this lever that changes which substation will shock you, allowing you to get the buried cache in one of them and an atomic battery in the other. Again, technically a puzzle, not really complicated. While I was at the dam, I took the opportunity to test out the poison bomb, which I hadn't yet thrown in my 7 days of playtime. The best I can say about it is it pretty much stun locks enemies that you can then go up to and finish off. While exploring further, I find a locked storage room, whose key can be found on the other side of the dam. Inside there's another bard crate, one more skill point that we can save for later. Exploring past the control room, you can find the body of Jenks with a note on it explaining that Charity, the sister of Prudence, has been gravely ill for months, and that he's gone out to find medical attention for her as he expresses frustration that none of the scientists who they graciously hosted ever checked in on the Datlo Hall after the disaster. As we've learned, the Windscale disaster happened 5 years ago, so Jenks was killed before he was able to find any help to send back to Datlo Hall. This means Charity fell ill over 5 years ago, which cannot bode well for the end of this story. Armed with information on Jenks' fate, we can return to the hall and bring it up to Prudence. But before we do, we can explore the L9 bunker positioned right below the dam. Because it's a bunker, we have access to a dispatch tube to dump more of our stuff. As we expect by this point, the bunker is full of ferals, and after taking them out, we can find more learning stimulants and a note from one of the scientists who had previously been hosted by the women at Datlo Hall. He describes in the note how dreamlike and wonderful it was for the 2 women to take care of them all, and we learn that the scientist actually tried convincing the sisters to join them in the bunkers after the quarantine went into effect, but they were too set in their ways and refused to leave Datlo Hall. We know by this point it wouldn't have helped anyways, because there's no survivors in any of the bunkers we've come across. There's also a section of the bunker that's blocked off by poison gas, and for some reason the ventilation controls won't work. We could walk through said poison using an antidote, but because I'm trying to build a narrative here, we'll come back later instead. This is also why we're gonna ignore this wall of poison right now. My storytelling demands it. Heading back to Datlo Hall, we confront Prudence by giving her the note we found on Jenks' body. She still doesn't seem to completely understand he's dead and thinks we're just his replacement. This works for us, however, since she now trusts us with the key to the conservatory. Unlocking the door on the other side of the building, we can now enter the conservatory and discover why Prudence didn't want us disturbing Charity inside. We find a skeleton next to a rusty pistol and a note. To my dearest sister Prue, I've locked myself away to not pass on this illness. I hear the voice whispering beyond my shoulder, telling me to join the dancing. I'm scared of what lies beyond, but I know it'll be better than lying here, alone, dying every minute. I ask you not to blame yourself. With love, Charity Rook. So the story is that after the disaster 5 years previously, Charity became ill with whatever infection turned the scientists in the bunkers into ferals. She began hearing voices, but instead of letting the infection progress or having a chance to infect her sister Prudence, she chose to put herself out of her misery in the conservatory. This death heavily affected her sister, who seems to have mentally snapped, choosing to live in a fantasy where everything is fine, and her biggest problem is making sure Datlo Hall is prepared for scientists who will never return. With this side adventure, we find our first semi-automatic pistol, an M1911. We also find a stealth manual, which I don't need because I already traded one with Molly. Duplicates aren't completely useless, however, since we can use them to barter as well. Returning to Prudence, we can try in multiple ways to explain to her that her sister is dead, but instead of there being a sad moment where her reality is shattered after seeing her sister dead, she instead walks outside and just stands there in place before going back inside. I'm pretty sure this is a bug because it seems like what she's meant to do is go into the conservatory. At one point she even got stuck in the loading zone void between the inside and outside of the house. I also noticed that after she glitched out, the gun and the stealth manual both respawned in the conservatory, meaning I have 2 of each now. I'm not really complaining though, because that means 2 manuals to trade, and that second pistol will become useful later. Instead of continuing into the interchange, I headed to Molly to trade for the atomic battery. After trading the battery, she tells us more gossip. The vicar of St. Catherine's Church purchased another battery off of her for a reason unknown. This is the perfect excuse to head into the village of Windham to see what's going on there. While heading to Windham, I found a cache in a stream, and inside was a note from a woman named June. It's a goodbye letter to her significant other, who she says has shared too much about the secrets of the Windscale plant with her. She explains her plans to lay low as the owner of the little tea room in Windham Village. I'm sure we'll run into this establishment while exploring the village, so we'll keep it in mind as we go. Approaching the gate, there's a loudspeaker announcing to the village that they must follow the protocol or face consequences. Entering the village, we can talk to a soldier who tells us we're free to wander about, and that Captain Sims is the man in charge, and can be found in the town square. On the way there, we overhear a woman being kicked out of her house. We aren't sure why exactly, but the soldiers claim they're helping, while literally forcing her to thank them for kicking her out. Continuing further, we can find another ringing phone booth.
The village of Wyndham is picturesque. The village of Wyndham is quaint. The village of Wyndham is dangerous. Be cautious.
Phone guy seems to already be setting the tone for this village. Captain Sim sounds like the best place to start, so we head to the center of town and we catch him in the middle of his daily briefing.
Now, in normal times, I'm sure your local folklore and beliefs might all seem very quaint and harmless. But these are not normal times. This area is under martial law, and I will not tolerate your casual heresies. The next person we catch flouting this ban would be lucky if they just end up in internment. I would remind you that the protocol is here for a reason. It is here to be obeyed. Dismissed.
His negative attitude towards the pagan practices tells us he is very much aware of the Druids and the voices leading people to the woods, and any signs of that sort of activity in the village is enough for you to get locked away. Captain Sims asks where we came from, and upon telling him we don't remember, he says it isn't the first time he's heard of an amnesiac after the quarantine began. This is interesting information because we now know we're not the only ones who've lost their memory in the zone before, but we still don't know why. Captain Sims wants to ask us a few questions in the village hall, hoping a stranger like us can provide some information. On our way there, I stopped to look at 2 shops nearby, the first being a bakery and the second being a hardware store. Entering the bakery, the owner, Iris Baxter, seems super skittish and is concerned with if we're a protocol soldier or not. When we ask why she's so worried, she explains they pry into people's lives until they find anything suspicious, but also claims she has nothing to hide. At the same time, if you listen closely, there are noises coming from upstairs that sound awfully like the voices in the soil. We'll look into that later, but for now, we move on to check out the next store. This is where we meet Morris Wick. The first thing he wants to know when he sees our new face is how we convince the protocol soldiers to let us in. He answers his own question, telling us Captain Sims uses any new face in the zone to try and get closer to escaping. When we ask about the disaster at the Windscale plant, he tells us a massive explosion woke everyone up, and not long after the protocol showed up. And in the same breath as telling the villagers there was no fear of radiation, everyone was told they couldn't leave. Morris has a very obvious disdain for the protocol, and seems really bitter about the temporary quarantine being not so temporary. He also tells us after a few months of the walls being up, many villagers left to the woods at the same time. He explains they started hearing voices and began talking about the same greater purpose we learned about from Mother Jago. We can trade with Morris for a painkiller recipe, and for some reason this dude sells fucking grenades, but besides that, not too much going on, so we'll just continue our journey. Heading to the village hall, we meet Captain Sims to learn more about the military presence in the quarantine zone. He explains how the protocol needs to eradicate the corruption that festers in the zone, and until they do, there's no chance of anyone leaving. We're still free to roam the village, but Captain Sims warns us not to listen to any of the pagan sentiments any of the villagers might be spouting. Little does he know, we're in so deep to this pagan shit, we were just talking to a corpse less than an hour ago. Captain Sims firmly believes the residents of Windham bedroom are up to no good, and says if we see anything suspicious, we should report it to him immediately. Because we're new in town, he believes the residents will be less suspicious of us and tells us that Protocol has had their eyes on the bakery if we want to start snooping around there. I took the time to also ask about Dr. Garrow, and he quickly admits to incarcerating her at the Protocol camp in Skemore. He says if we show our goodwill to the Protocol, then he might let us in to see her. Asking about the interchange makes him not too happy, but it does lead him to reveal an entrance just near the church behind the substation. We now know where 3 entrances to the interchange are located, but we'll continue investigating the village for now. I already felt like Iris was quite suspicious, so I decided to head back to the bakery to discover what she was hiding. She's a very paranoid woman, and if you don't threaten her, she won't give up the secrets she's keeping. That being, her husband was messing around with a buddy in the bunker near the substation, and he walked into a blue cloud of spores. He's been ill ever since, and hearing the voices from the soil. She says the only luck they've had with the infection is a strange tonic that they found in the woods. We can choose to make her a vial of it to try to help his infection, and tell her as long as he's not hurting anyone, then we won't tell Captain Sims. Exploring the upstairs, the door to the bedroom where voices can be heard is locked, and we can find a note explaining that someone named Tina watched over the bakery while Iris secretly headed to the woods. We can infer the reason was to get a hold of the strange tonic needed to help her husband. The note implies that Tina had access to the bedroom to serve food to Iris's husband, so maybe we can find her around town. We don't get any leads from the note, but Tina mentions a garage, which we can find on the east side of town, and the key to the bedroom can be found inside, as well as a note from Iris to Tina, where she begs for her friend not to mention her husband's illness to anyone, even after he apparently attacked her. With the key, we can get into the bedroom, where we find Philip Baxter. His eyes are glowing blue like the Druids in the cave, but he doesn't seem to still have his sanity, and immediately begins trying to attack us. If we kill him, Iris will also attack us, so instead of going down this route, I chose to just leave. But if you enter a new loading zone, such as a different building, and then head back into the bakery, you can find Iris alone in the bedroom. She says she left the door open for a second, and her husband bolted for the woods. She's upset he's gone, but just hopes he doesn't end up hurting anyone. The only thing of value in the room is a consumable manual, not the most useful, but we'll take it. And if we head back to Casterfell Woods, in a building close to the city entrance, we can find Iris's husband dead. He didn't make it too far, but it seems unlikely he ended up hurting anyone either. Because I decided to help Iris rather than rat her out, I now have nothing to report back to Captain Sims. So I continued exploring the town to see if I could find anything else of note. The other thing that came to mind was the atomic battery that I knew was in the church somewhere, so I headed that way in hopes of finding something I could report. Entering the church, we find a murder has happened. Talking to the vicar, Reverend McHenry, he asks us to just ignore that we saw anything, and when we pry, he explains that if Captain Sims finds out, then it would be bad for the whole village. We can use this information to leverage the vicar into giving us the atomic battery we know he has. We could just immediately report this crime to Captain Sims, but instead I decided to do my own investigation to figure out who murdered this woman. We learned from a member of the church the victim's name is Maisie, and after prying enough, we learned she was very nosy, always snooping into others' business and following people around. Perhaps she found something and was killed to keep her silent. On her body, we find a note saying she had discovered foul play and would be camping out near the Meyerview Hotel to try and discover more. Before we head out to continue our investigation, we can take a look around the church. There are a few scattered notes about, one of them from a history book describing Kepler's star, a real-life supernova that was visible to the naked eye in 1604. We aren't really sure if this has anything to do with the story, but it'd be pretty out of place to have a note like that for no real reason. There's also a door in the basement we aren't able to open, and the key needed for it is unknown. We're also able to head up to the church's tower, where we'd be able to get a good view of the village if there wasn't endlessly spawning bats for no reason. And the bats aren't even the worst part. They cause the soldiers to aggro below, who begin shooting and even throwing grenades at the tower to try and kill them. After checking out the church, I continued the investigation into Maisie's death. Nearby the Meyerview Hotel, we find a shack with another note addressed to Maisie, presumably left behind during her snooping. It's from Reverend McHenry. The note says it's been too quiet lately, so Maisie needs to keep a lookout for anyone acting strange. This means the Reverend is not likely the person who killed Maisie, but that his requests at her to spy on people make him partially responsible for her death. We aren't sure why exactly she was spying, but since he told us not to let Captain Sims know about it, we can assume he's not working for Protocol. The note also has a section of handwriting from Maisie, tracking the movements of an unknown person up a hill and into a cellar surrounded by rat rat swarms. Entering the cellar, we find it infested by rats, but after dealing with them, we discover a note on paper marked by the Druid symbol, addressed to Morris Wick. The note explains Maisie had discovered Morris was secretly a Druid, so he had to kill her. Further in the cellar, we find another bard crate and a note from Morris Wick explaining how the harsh restrictions imposed by protocol have been slowly wearing down the villagers. This leaves them as perfect targets for him to spread the ideas of the Druids in secret, and he hopes to one day bring the ones who believe in their greater purpose to the woods. With what we know, we can either head to Captain Sims, Reverend McHenry, or we can directly confront Morris Wick. I headed to the hardware store to confront Morris with the evidence we found, and he immediately starts defending himself, claiming the vicar is blackmailing most of the village through information Maisie would gather. He claims McHenry required the villagers to pay a donation to the church, and that he claimed it was to help keep the protocol soldiers in line, but he'd also use the people's secrets against them and rat them out to Captain Sims if they didn't donate. While this is probably true, Morris was no saint to begin with. The secret Maisie discovered was that he works for the cultists in the woods, the group that doesn't have a problem killing for their cause. Since the Reverend himself doesn't sound the greatest, I decided to bargain with Morris, saying I wouldn't snitch on him if he made it worth my while. This was definitely worth it because we now get the crafting manual. Not only that, but I can then head back to the captain and immediately report the murder, giving him the evidence I found on Morris. McHenry isn't too happy about this, but we already talked him out of his atomic battery, so there's no real downside. Before we continue, let's talk about the crafting skills. The first, crafting speed, is completely useless. There's zero reason to care about crafting faster. The second is deep pockets. It not only allows you to carry more crafting materials, but also more ammunition, which is the part that makes it useful. The last skill is gunsmith. Reading the description word for word, it says unlocks recipes to craft upgraded weapons. Now don't get your hopes up. This doesn't give you some Fallout 4 level of weapon customization or some Tarkov level of firearm realism. Rest in peace, bud. Oh shit, he got killed by Mommy Finder. What this skill lets you do is grab two of the same gun, tape them together, and get a slightly better version. It's super underwhelming, but it does increase the damage, especially when you get the gun up to the 3rd tier. The problem is, the system of combining two of the same weapon isn't well thought out in the limitations of the inventory system, and there are a number of reasons it feels jank. When it comes to any of the small firearms, you can hold as many as inventory slots, so there isn't too much of an issue there. But when it comes to long rifles, your space is limited to 4 weapons, including your melee weapons. If you're trying to max upgrade a gun, you need 4 of the same weapon, and they need to be combined 2 at a time. That means if you're carrying a melee weapon, a rifle, and a shotgun, you could have 1 free slot to pick up another rusty gun. It's almost like someone thought that far ahead. Now I have a stock grade version of my weapon, with an extra slot to pick up another gun. Ah, look, here's another. Awesome. But you can't combine the 3rd one you pick up with your stock version, because you need 2 rusty rifles to combine into a stock, so then you can combine the 2 stocks together if you had enough fucking gun oil to do so. All of these issues are before pointing out how rare the best weapons are. You are not going to be finding another JM3 for quite a while. You can argue it doesn't really matter since the JM3 is already so good, but that just goes to show how terribly useless the upgrade system really is. Now that we're in good graces with the protocol, the captain tells us more about Dr. Garrow, believing we can get more information out of her since we're a new face. The captain says she was inside the quarantine zone as the walls were going up, but found some way to escape. And for some unknown reason, she decided to go back into the zone as part of Convoy 5. Captain Sims says Dr. Garrow was caught meddling with the Bard machinery protocol had commandeered. Specifically, she somehow disabled the Skemore camp's automatic security system and was trying to get into a Bard bunker. A few protocol soldiers claim she muttered something that caused the turrets to just shut off. Sims doesn't believe that explanation and wants us to question her to figure out how she did it. We now have full freedom to roam Skemore without being burned alive by that one robot we saw earlier. Before heading there, I made a stop at a pub on the way, and inside we met Alf Buckshaw. He notably has the same last name as the hobo we met at the beginning of the game, Nat Buckshaw. Alf welcomes us to the last pub in Cumberland, and from him we can buy a replenishing supply of alcohol. He tries to get a feel for for our mentality by asking our thoughts on the protocol soldiers. I tell him I believe they're nothing but tyrants, which makes him trust us enough to help him with an errand. He says we just need to acquire some notes from a few people in Skemore. One person is named Nora, and he warned she's not fond of strangers. The other he claims moves all around Skemore, but they had a meeting place I can check at. I also ask about where I can get some stronger firepower, and he points me to a trader in Skemore. Running into a pub reminded me of the little tea room note we found in the stream back in Slatendale. After a quick walk around the middle of town, I found said tea shop abandoned and in ruins. A note left out back says Sims wanted the place sterilized because there was corruption inside, and that protocol was to take any valuables to the village hall. Maybe this is why people are being kicked out of their houses. The infection, or corruption as the protocol call it, is sprouting up in houses, and to keep the villagers from being infected, the protocol is forcefully evicting them. The tea shop is considered a restricted area, so if the protocol soldiers see us inside, we'll be shot at. The only time stealth has ever worked for me is crouching in this building, which keeps our footstep noises from immediately triggering every soldier outside. In the corner of the second floor, we can find the charred skeleton of June, along with a key. Why would we find the corpse of June burned inside her tea shop, if the goal of protocol was to protect the villagers from corruption? Investigating the village hall, we can find a crate of June's things, along with a note explaining the real reason for the burning of the tea shop. Captain Sims felt June was too smart and too good at hiding her secrets, so he had the little tea room burned down with her still inside, as a means to silence her. Inside the lockbox, there's nothing but a single note called June's errands. It turns out to be code leading us to a ruin near the boathouse, where we can use the metal detector to find a cache buried by June before her death. There are two notes inside, protocol secrets and June's diary. The diary entry mentioned the man June was engaged to was named Francis, and he worked under Dr. Garrow in the robotics lab of the interchange. The protocol secrets note explains that whatever happened at the Windscale plant was more than some nuclear explosion like the village was told, and none of them should even be alive. June says that whatever happened at the plant was supposed to be buried along with the residents of Windham. If protocol was meant to bury both the disaster's cause and the residents, why haven't they done so? It's possible that Sims decided to stay in control of the residents as some sort of tyrant, but he himself seems quite eager to get out, almost as if he's not able to leave voluntarily. Maybe when he said that no one would be able to leave unless the corruption was eradicated, he actually meant that the protocol required his men to stay locked in the zone until the job was done. We aren't sure at this point, but what we are sure of is that Sim's motives are not that of helping the villagers. So while we'll accept his entry into Skemore, to avoid unwanted gunfire, we need to remain cautious of his motives. Finally, heading into Skemore, we're met by two soldiers who would otherwise be hostile, but since we're in Sim's good graces, they won't bug us for the time being. Also, why the fuck is this Asian dude in the British military? Our first stop will be the trade post we learned about from Alf. Inside a ruined building, we meet Corporal Bootsy Hughes. He explains when Protocol rolled in, they took over the old Royal Air Force base to the south, as well as bunkers throughout Skemore. Because outlaws make their way into the area often, the Protocol shoot first and ask questions later. But as long as we stay out of the restricted areas Bootsy marked on our map, he says we'll be fine. I was expecting more in terms of firepower when I heard about this trade post, but he does sell the firearm mastery manual. One of the skills lowers recoil, pretty much useless since automatic fire is terribly wasteful. Another lowers weapon sway while aiming down sight, also not super useful, and the last makes you do more damage when your stamina is low. I'm really not sure how useful the last one is, since we aren't given a percent or anything, but it's definitely better than the other two. On the main road we can find another phone booth and get another call from the phone guy.
This land looks safe. This land is not safe. You should be cautious in this land. This land may kill you.
We very quickly see what he means as we run into another swarm enemy in the form of crows. They act like every other swarm and are really annoying. Around the open fields are sections of fungal growth sprouting up out of the ground, and we see the purpose of the flame-throwing robots is to try and destroy the growths, and it looks like a losing battle since they're still sprouting up out of the burnt sections. I decided to immediately head to the Skemore camp, and no one inside really minded me digging around in any area I wanted. For this video, I've been replaying through the entire game in the most good faith way possible. What actually happened when I reached Skemore was I got my ass handed to me sneaking in through the mines. Then in the late game I had to fight my way through this camp, which took forever and felt terrible. Checking around the offices, we find paperwork explaining how the protocol tried to improve civilian morale by pretending to signal over the wall using an Aldous lamp. Apparently the lamp then broke, so they lied and said they switched to a super high-tech infrared lamp and were still signaling every night. There's another note saying a patrol had lost a robot to the north, near Nora's barn. It doesn't give us a quest marker, so after we're done exploring we can head that direction. I found a key on one of the desks, which allows us into the armory on the west side of camp. Inside we can find a bit of ammo as well as an infilled LMG. It's the second automatic firearm you can get your hands on and does more damage than the JM3 while being less accurate. There isn't too much else to check out inside the camp, though approaching this large door will put us in a restricted area. We'll get back to that, but for now we head into the Skemore prison towards the rear of the camp. Inside we can find a dispatch tube, as well as notes that explain the prison used to be a black site for housing Nazi prisoners during World War II. It's unknown if any of the people in here are still Nazis, but it's unlikely this grandma is anything more than a villager who stepped out of line. We can find paperwork explaining Garrow had been marked for interrogation and moved to solitary confinement in the back of the prison. Venturing that way, there isn't too much to find, but we do get another firearm, the Peerless SMG. SMGs are probably the most useless gun in the game since almost no one uses them. Because we can't craft ammo, we have to loot people using an SMG to get SMG rounds. And since barely anyone uses an SMG, it's very hard to stay stocked up on this ammo type. Continuing on to solitary confinement, we find Dr. Garrow in a cage, and because we don't look like Protocol, she believes we're there to break her out. She claims to be the only person that can stop what's happening in the zone. Trying to get information out of her, she's only willing to answer one question, so I ask how she managed to disable the Protocol security systems. The secret is a device she calls a signal redirector that lets her alter the polarity of security devices remotely. She says the Protocol thought it was just an old radio and stored it in a room nearby with the rest of her things. The signal redirector is the last tool you can unlock in the game, and it's so simple it's almost annoying how underdeveloped it is. You see these boxes? If you're within spitting distance of one, you can point the device at it and either turn something on or off. I assure you, it's just as basic as it sounds, and there are exactly 0 actual puzzles requiring this device. Instead of using the signal redirector to free Garrow, I took it for myself and headed back to report my findings. Maybe we can grab her later, but I'm sure Captain Sims wouldn't be too happy if we freed her right now. Before reporting to Sims, I decided to stop by Eric and Nora to collect Alf's notes. Reaching Eric's meeting place, we fight off a number of outlaws, only to find Eric dead inside the greenhouse, but we still collect his note to bring to Alf. Nearby is the L1 bunker, and entering it, we find it home to a number of bandits with no infection in sight. The most notable thing in the bunker is a recipe for a radiation resistance tonic. This far into the game, I have not come across radiation a single time. Everything we've seen so far is poison or infection, and the reason for this is probably because whatever happened at the Windscale plant had nothing to do with radiation, but we might need this tonic later. This bunker was used for vehicle storage, and we can find a memo from around the date of the disaster. The Protocol requisitioned armor vehicles to create a roadblock into town, and if we walk the main road towards Windham, we can find the outcome of this roadblock: a massacre of the villagers attempting to leave the quarantine before the walls were completed. This is the second piece of evidence we found that the life of the villagers is not much of a real concern to Captain Sims and the Protocol, and part of the reason the villagers aren't allowed into Skemore is probably to prevent them from learning about this massacre. The massacre took place right outside the Brinsop Manor, which is where Agravain's comrade is said to have set up base. The entire building is in ruins, but out back is a maze, at the end of which we can find a body of a rather dapper looking gentleman. On the side of the building is a cellar, and inside we can find Ilya Kozlov, the sergeant we heard about back in Castrofel. We mention finding his previous cellar and tell him his comrade who gave into the voices was nowhere to be found. Kozlov explains that after he made it to the manor, he got careless and was captured by Protocol, but eventually escaped the prison and made his way back. We mention finding the orders of Agravain and share the news to Kozlov that she's inside the zone. He then asks for help fixing his radio so he can try and get into contact with the outside. Despite us knowing this probably won't help because of the interference field, we only need 10 scrap and 4 glue, and what are we using those things for anyways? He thanks us for helping and gives us a bit of information as payment, telling us his comrades infiltrated the Windscale plant, but something happened inside the quarantine lab lab that led to the spread of the infection. And he tells us to come back later to see if he got the radio working. But on returning, this fucking commie has abandoned us, saying he couldn't get the radio working and he can only trust himself, so we shouldn't try to follow him. And with that, we continue back to Nora's barn to go grab her note. Reaching Nora's barn, we find the entire thing heavily booby-trapped, and after disarming our way inside, she's initially wary of us until we tell her Alf sent us. After getting her note, we can ask what she knows about the Windscale plant, and she directs us to the last interchange door, the same one in the protocol camp that's still counted as trespassing. With all locations of the interchange discovered, it won't be long now till we finally pick our first door to venture into. Heading past Nora's barn, we can find the missing robot sunk into a pond. It's of course surrounded by leeches, and I tried again to use the lure bomb to no avail. After claiming the atomic battery, I headed north and killed a number of outlaws, before finding a cave full of ferals. There doesn't seem to be any lore implications to this tunnel, but we can find a modified JM3. The main difference seems to be a faster fire rate, which is the opposite of useful. And because it doesn't count as a duplicate rusty version of the weapon, we can't combine it with the one we already have, which is fucking stupid. Working our way back towards Windham, we pass close enough to the bunker June mentioned to check it out. Getting close causes us to trespass, so we quickly enter to see what we can find. Like the vehicle storage bunker, there's no corruption inside this one, and it's instead populated by protocol soldiers, who attack on sight since I'm in a restricted area. We can kill them freely, however, since this counts as a different space than Skemore, and as long as we don't get spotted trespassing above ground, the soldiers throughout will still be friendly. I of course tried stealth again, which alerted the entire bunker I was there. I already said it, but why implement takedowns if they aren't going to be stealthy by default? After taking out the soldiers, we can upgrade our handgun, but besides that, we have the standard dispatch tube and a few skill points scattered about. There's also a large amount of scrap and other crafting materials around, which can be explained by the bunker having been converted into a workshop to disassemble the old Windscale robots into the armor worn by the protocol soldiers. In the bathroom, we can find a hole behind a push-aside locker, and inside is the corpse of a scientist named Windfall. On his body is a key card, as well as a note that explains his escorts out of the zone died, and that the soldiers weren't letting any of the scientists leave. Protocol confiscated a crate he was trying to smuggle out that housed one of his greatest discoveries. He says it wasn't searched before being taken to a field station, and the area it takes us to on the map is the same one Bootsy said we need to stay away from. There's also a room behind Windfall's body that houses more barred crates and a couple more skill points. Heading back to the village, we can give the notes we found to Alf, both of which are very strangely worded, with no real discernible meaning past him purchasing something from Nora and Eric.
Let's just say you've given the village a chance to, well, speak up for itself.
Heading back to Sims, we tell him what we discovered about Garrow's signal redirector. He lets us hold on to the device and gives us a new mission. Some of the villagers working for the Druids stole the only high-power radio the protocol have, which they'll need when it comes time to evacuate, and points us to the speaking cave. Heading through the cave again, everyone inside is hostile since we no longer have the offering, but luckily, killing them doesn't harm our reputation with Mother Jago. We can find the radio in the room behind the visage, alongside an audio recording of Captain Sims explaining the real reason for the strict regulations in the village and why he's trying to escape.
Sergeant Malloy, to answer your question, we are one bored squadron leader away from perdition. If those RAF dolts decide the quarantine is insecure and enact Operation Atomfall, the whole zone will burn. That's why we have to get out as quickly as humanly possible, and why we don't tell the good people of Wyndham a single blessed thing about it. Now you have your answer. Erase this recording immediately. That's an order.
Bringing the radio back to Sims, we can confront him about this recording, and he explains what he calls the necessary evil of Operation Atomfall.
It's a necessary evil. If the quarantine is ever to be lifted, attempts to have cleared the zone internally have proved ineffectual. I regret to say, the zone itself must be sterilized. Those are my orders.
If the quarantine zone is ever lifted and the infection not stopped, the entire zone will be destroyed, along with anyone inside of it. As we've seen in Skemore, he's had no luck in sterilizing the zone, and is now choosing to focus instead on his own men. Now that we've proven our curiosity is more important than survival, he believes we might be able to destroy the actual cause of the corruption within the zone, Oberon. He isn't actually sure what Oberon is, only vaguely aware from what the protocol have discovered in the zone, but he believes it's the root of whatever evil is causing the corruption. But like others who've tried, the protocol haven't been able to get into the interchange itself, and he believes through our curiosity that we'll be able to make headway. With our final lead into the interchange, we can choose whichever door we want to enter, either the Slatendale, Casterfell, Windham, or Skemore entrances. We'll eventually need to enter all of them, so I decided to head to Skemore in hopes of checking out the field station mentioned in Windfall's notes. Exiting the village hall, we find that someone has destroyed a robot, and the atomic battery powering it is free to collect. Stopping by Alf's, we ask if he had anything to do with it, and he outright denies any connection to its destruction. But if we look in his cellar, we can find a note mentioning the Reverend having an atomic battery stashed away, the one we coaxed him out of earlier in the playthrough. Alf says he'll keep it in mind in case him and whoever he's working with needs something with more of a kick. It's pretty apparent that whatever package we helped him receive was used to destroy the robot patrolling town. If we dig deeper into the basement, we can even find a secret tunnel that leads to Skemore. This is presumably how he smuggled whatever supplies he used to destroy the robot. But something else to note is just how insanely prevalent the fungal growths are in this cave. There's even a swarm creature we haven't seen anywhere else so far, some sort of glowing bug that explodes after being stepped on. There isn't really much to discover down there, but now that we're back in Skemore, we can head for the field station. It's guarded by a single protocol soldier and counts as a restricted zone. We could sneak past him, but I want that shotgun, goddammit. The Auto 5 is amazing. It will clear rooms of enemies in seconds, and is probably the best close-range weapon in the entire game. Praise be our Lord and Savior, John Moses Browning. This bunker is an alternate path to locating a signal redirector, which can be found in Windfall's locked crate. We already have one, so this isn't useful to us, but that doesn't make the bunker itself useless. Pretty much all the soldiers in here have guns, including JM3s. I need to point out, however, that the JM3s they drop are stock, which is tier 2 in the upgrade system. This means our first rusty JM3 is still completely useless, and we need to find 2 stocks to upgrade to a pristine version. By the end of the bunker, we have a pristine Auto 5, a pristine Falkirk, which I believe is a legally safe name for an effin' Fal, and a pristine JM3. There are a few sections of the bunker designed to demonstrate the use of the signal redirector, but I need to clarify, flipping a switch does not qualify as a puzzle, and that's the only way this device has been used so far. There's another weapon in this bunker that's so bad I literally forgot to mention it, the stun stick. The selling point is it builds up electric damage until it stuns your enemy. The problem is it only lasts like 6 hits before it runs out of charge, and there's no way to recharge it. F tier weapon, completely half-baked garbage. Now that we've upgraded our weapons, we can finally head out of the bunker and into the interchange. So this was actually not part of my plan. Instead of cleanly heading to the interchange, I have now angered everyone in Skemore, and had to fight my way through quick saves for a good 10 minutes. It should be noted that this doesn't at all seem to affect my standing with Captain Sims, which is definitely jarring and not really good game design. I also don't know if there's any way to calm down the protocol within Skemore, so they're going to be hostile for the rest of the playthrough. Since getting into the interchange through Skemore is more trouble than I want right now, I decided to work my way back to Slatendale, where we finally approach the endgame, the interchange. The first thing we see entering the bunker is a massive vault door. In a control room above the entrance, we have access to a dispatch tube and can open the vault door using the modified keycard we were given at the beginning of the game.
Access denied. Unauthorized personnel may not, under any circumstances, enter the... Access granted. The interchange.
Nearby the entrance is a lever that turns on a few lights, and leaned against a building is a corpse with a note. From it, we learn that after the quarantine went into effect, not only did the doors to the outside seal shut, but each section of the interchange was also sealed off, leaving everyone trapped where they were. The note also implies it's been months since the quarantine protocol went into effect, and the writer appears to actually have starved to death while keeping a log at the request of his site manager, who we know from the logs went through the robotics wing to reach the lower part of the construction site that's currently blocked off. Said manager also has the key to the site office the writer was locked out of. Continuing further, we find a few powered off turrets, as well as 3 quarantine shutters. One is marked medical, another robotics, and the third to the main facility. There's enough room to crawl underneath, and inside we find arrows directing us to Oberon. This is where we discover the main control room for the interchange, central processing, which is completely powered off. Next to the body of the scientist is an atomic battery and another ringing phone.
You require the operator. Perception is key. Listen to me. Listen. Everything depends upon the interchange. It must live again. And then Oberon must die. Oberon must.
A note on the scientist explains that the quarantine protocol was activated to prevent the secret of Oberon from destroying the entire country. The facility was sealed by pulling the atomic batteries out of the data stores of each sector of the interchange. So presumably, if we reinstall the missing batteries, we can power on the facility one sector at a time, which will then give us access to Oberon. The first step is to use this battery to power on the central control terminal, giving us access to both Data Store Charlie and Delta. Starting with Charlie, below the entrance we can find the battery terminal, as well as a note with a lead to the battery we found at Casterfell Dam earlier in the playthrough. It's a good way to make sure you have an idea where to find what you need to progress, in case you decided to head to the interchange as soon as you found the lead to it. Inserting a battery into the terminal, the quarantine is lifted in Sector C, as the data store powers on.
Power restored in Data Store Charlie. Analysis. Quarantine has been lifted in this sector. Access granted to medical facility. Status report. Spectroscopy analysis of biological sample 1 was aborted with no positive matches. Partial results have been stored in Casterfell Wood's memory bank.
There's mentions of some sort of data on biological sample 1 being stored in a memory bank in Casterfell Woods. We get no leads from this info, but it's something to remember for later. Below the battery terminal is the actual data store server room. This is where we find the third and final puzzle in the entire game. There's a storage room whose key can be found on the body of a scientist nearby, but the door won't open because the card reader lacks power. To power it on, you have to press 4 buttons in the correct order. It's literally the same puzzle as the gas valves, but instead of 3 options, there are 8. You also don't get the answer handed to you, though you're given feedback when you've pressed the correct button. So after a short amount of brute forcing, it's not a hard puzzle to solve. On my first playthrough, however, my time to solve the puzzle was affected by the fact the entire thing disappeared, along with the ladder out of the server room. In the now unlocked storage room, we can find a letter explaining how the presence of protesters outside the Windscale plant helped sell the idea it was a legitimate nuclear facility. Turning on Data Store C, we now have access to admin and the medical wing. In the main freight yard, we can see the area Mother Jago must have been referring to below medical. It's completely surrounded by the same deadly infection mist found in the Turboid swamp, so we'll leave it be for now. Heading back up through admin, the entire office has been completely overrun by ferals. There are 2 audio logs that tell us the first hours after the disaster. No one in admin was even aware of the quarantine protocol, and after the Windscale plant giant explosion, they were all told evacuations were being carried out. Little did they know, the interchange had been turned into a coffin to try to contain the infection caused by Oberon. After making my way out of admin, I decided the best way to go about the interchange would be to quickly open every entrance and power on all the sectors before exploring the unlocked areas. We hear a familiar voice over the PA system, as it seems Joyce Tanner found her way into the interchange behind us. Returning to Data Store C, we can discuss what she plans to do now that she's inside, and she says she plans to use the communication systems of the interchange to try and punch through the interference field inside the zone, promising that if she can get a signal out, she's willing to bring us along when calling for extraction. She says we need an array of transmitters to get her signal through, and that she knows of a few radio towers throughout the zone that could work, but we'll need to manually disable the quarantine security on each of them. There are 3 of them in total, one in Slatendale, one in Casterfell Woods, and one in Skemore. We agree to help, but before we do that, we still have access to power on Data Store D, so we continue in that direction. Powering on the terminal, we now gain access to the robotics lab. This server room has a parkour segment instead of another puzzle, the payoff of which is the crafting manual, which we already strong-armed out of the hardware store owner back in Windham. There's also a note inside the storage room explaining how encoded comms about the facility's true purpose had been picked up by a town called Cheltenham. Looking into the city, it actually became something called a twin town to the Russian city of Sochi. It's possible that the encoded messages were picked up by Russian communists, and from there the infiltration of the Windscale plant by Agravain's group began. On the other side of the freight yard, there's now a powered-on robot patrolling. The weak spot for these types of robots is the glass dome on its head. If you shoot it enough, the entire thing will explode, but if you shoot it just enough, it'll overheat and the atomic battery on the back will eject to allow it to cool off. If you pull the battery fast enough, the robot will shut down. And fun fact, you can actually insert the battery back into the robot, which will power it back on. Of course, it doesn't make the robot friendly, because that would be too much fun. It's the same issue as I have with the turrets. You can only turn them on or off. You can't make them friendly, which would be infinitely cooler. Next to Data Store D, there's a crane control room that requires a key we don't currently have. Continuing to look around the freight yard, we find the body of a scientist with a note explaining the state of things 2 days into the quarantine. People started realizing the lockdown wasn't temporary, and to try and guarantee a way out, a scientist named John started trying to get his hands on a signal redirector to bypass the facility's lockdown protocol. He's under the impression that someone named Frank Stevens has one, and believes him to be hiding out in robotics. This Frank is most likely the Francis we learned about in June's buried diary. But before we head through robotics, I wanted to get through the other interchange doors to power on sectors A and B. Behind the quarantine shutters leading back to Slatendale, we hear the sounds of outlaws who've made their way into the bunker. As we open up more entrances into the previously untouched interchange, more factions throughout the zone will explore their respective entries, and the outlaws in particular will be a decent source of ammo down the road. Since we have to head back through Slatendale, I decided to detour to the radio tower above the nearby outlaw camp, but to turn it on we need to find the access key, the lead for which is on a note next to the control panel. Through the quarry pond below the outlaw camp you can find a small cave, and on the body of a scientist is the key. Turning on the radio, Joyce Tanner sends a message.
It's working. Are you reading me over at the tower? Oh, I hope so. Smashing work. That's one tower reading green on my console. Keep it up and we'll have ourselves a working array in no time. And I've been doing some digging myself. They buried the Meteor's information well, but I found a few threads to follow. Talk to you about it soon.
Heading back to Windham, we can now enter the substation because we're in Captain Sim's good graces. And after passing over the body of the baker's husband's friend we heard about earlier, we find the next vault door entry into the interchange. Behind this door we're greeted with much stronger signs of infection than in Slatendale. There's also a large rat swarm in the entrance, but after taking care of them we can find a note on a desk explaining that the interchange's data stores originally used the Casterfell Dam for power before switching to atomic atomic batteries. There's also a female scientist who tried to keep a log of her time locked away in the interchange. She was allegedly alive for 6 months before dying of starvation, and over time she too began hearing voices as the glowing fungus spread throughout the ventilation system. The note also implies this bitch is gay, which means Atomfall gets 1 extra point for diversity. I then have to remove 1 point for killing off the only gay character in the game. The note says that her and her lover would hang out at the Turboid swamp, and this information is supposed to lead you on the path to finding Mother Jago if you haven't by the time you reach the Casterfell interchange entrance. Her gay lover is Helen, a name we saw mentioned in a note back in Slatendale. Helen allegedly gave in to the voices and went to join the Druids, but I couldn't find any signs of her anywhere in the Casterfell woods, and I'm pretty sure the dead guy in the Turboid swamp is a dude and not Helen. We can also open up the interchange door from Casterfell woods, which doesn't do much besides allow us better access around the map. By this point I can say I honestly do not appreciate the way the interchange was designed. There are 4 doors and 4 sectors to activate. Instead of doing the smart thing and attaching each door to one section, the Slatendale door opens sectors C and D, and the Skemore door opens B. Both the Casterfell and Windham doors open sector A. I don't understand why they didn't just make one door correspond to one sector of the interchange. My initial rationalization for this was that they designed the interchange to line up with the 4 areas within the quarantine zone. So in a good faith effort to investigate this theory, I used the given grid system on the maps to line up each section, and none of them actually line up correctly. I've marked each one of the load zones for each area, and none of them are accurate to the grid system. The worst offender is the Windham entrance to the Casterfell woods. A gate in the wall, which is an entire map's length away from the correct position you should come out to. I then tried to line up the interchange to any of the entrances, and not a single one lined up correctly, with Slatendale's entry being the most inconsistent. So there's really no valid explanation for why the interior of the interchange couldn't have been designed better. Entering data store A, there's no puzzle, and instead the entire server room is overrun by infection. Using Mother Jago's tonic, we can power on the sector, and in the storage room, find the same glowing bugs as in the tunnels to Skemore. Powering on sector A appears to have only unlocked the reception area for the medical wing, and there really isn't anything much there, but a ton of fungal growth and a lot of ferals. The last door we need to open is back in Skemore, but again I wasn't sure how I'd be treated once I got there. I decided that while I was in the area, I should go turn on the second tower for Joyce Tanner. It can be found in the northwest section of the map, and the key can be found in the L1 vehicle storage bunker we explored earlier. Turning on the tower, we get another message from Tanner.
Another tower back up and running. Well done. I found bits and pieces on Oberon and the nuclear plant, but nothing conclusive yet. I'll keep digging and let you know if I find anything more. Good luck with the final tower.
Afterwards, on a nearby telephone, the operator has a new message for us.
You have met Miss Tanner. You should trust no one. You should trust me.
With the towers wrapped up, it's time to head to the last door of the interchange. To my surprise, every protocol soldier had forgotten my transgressions, but the robots, they never forget. I got the most bombastic side-eye from the flamethrowing robot as I walked past, and I also had to stealth my way past a turret that would have aggroed on me otherwise. Eventually, I made it to the door, and we enter to find it's not just a straight entrance like the last 3. Instead, we're in an office area that's been commandeered by the protocol, and we have to fight our way to the basement to find the interchange vault door. There isn't much lore in the upper part of the bunker besides a log that tells us the protocol had no luck getting into the interchange and eventually just started using the area for storage. After opening the vault door, we're greeted by a few ferals, but besides that, it's generally pretty quiet. Entering data store B, we can find a note explaining how the data stores kept burning out the atomic batteries, and that a replacement is needed, but most had been going to Garrow's robots instead. This is the first we've heard of the atomic battery's ability to burn out. Powering on data store B, we now have access to all sections of the interchange. The sector's security is back online, and a flamethrower robot can be seen patrolling the freight yard. We can easily take it out by shooting 2 of its tanks, which causes it to overheat, allowing us to pull its battery. Back in the server room, there's a knot puzzle where you need to redirect 2 power switches to the storage room door card reader before it can be opened. Inside is a bard crate, and another note about convincing the locals the wind scale plant was nothing more than a nuclear power facility. Back in the main freight yard, we can find a body with a key to the crane control room next to Data Store D. There's also a note saying some of the crates are blocking a path in the interchange that leads back to the black site being used by Protocol to house Dr. Garrow. Heading into the crane control room, we find another signal redirector segment that I must clarify again does not count as a puzzle. That lets us use the crane to move a crate, giving us access to the solitary confinement room in the back of the Skemore prison. Now is the time I decided to free Dr. Garrow, since we can immediately head back into the interchange if things get heated. After using the signal redirector to get into the control room, we open all the cells and watch her immediately book it back the way we came. Following her back into the interchange, we can find her in the central processing room. I asked why she came back into the zone, and she refused to elaborate any further than saying she had unfinished business to take care of. And when trying to ask about Oberon, she does admit it's the root of everything that's happened, but refuses to go into detail, arguing we aren't even supposed to have access to this government facility, and that she's only turning a blind eye because we helped her escape. Once she's done with what she needs to do, she plans on getting out, and we ask if we can come along with her. Because she believes us to be useful, she says if we help her retrieve her notes from the lower level of the robotics lab, she'll let us tag along when it's time for her to leave. Making our way into the robotics lab, we start on the upper floor. To the right, we have the robot assembly room, and inside we discover something pretty interesting. In a storage room off to the side, there's an entire area covered in radiation. The only place in the entire game so far that we've seen any sort of radiation status effect. It seems to be coming from devices that look like broken or burnt out atomic batteries. And using our radiation resistance tonic, we can reach a bard crate that contains a key to the robotics control room. Next to the storage room is another door that requires a key, which we can get off a body after messing with a few of the robot assembly stations. Through the door we find a hatch leading to a bard crate, as well as a page from some research notes entitled Oberite Supply. The note says the scientists were trying to use crystallography to determine what Oberon is, and synthesize something called Oberite. Crystallography is the study of the molecular structure of crystals. Using X-rays, scientists can determine a crystal's makeup by the angle and intensity of the ray's diffraction. This tells us that Oberon is some sort of crystal discovered in the mines, and that this crystal is what was used to create the atomic batteries and the artificial brains controlling the robots. The problem is, the crystallography tests showed random results, meaning that whatever Oberon is, it didn't act like an inanimate crystalline structure. This most likely has something to do with the fungal growth being part of Oberon, and instead of it being a rock, it turned out to be some sort of living organism that was buried deep underground. The notes also imply that this Oberite has been synthesized in very small amounts, and attempts to mass produce it have failed, which could explain why there was a battery shortage around the facility, as we learned from the note in Data Store B. And the robotics lab appears to have burnt through an insane amount while creating the artificial brains. On the left side of the lab, we can find the canteen, which is heavily populated by the infected rats. Past this area is a number of offices, including the control room, and inside we can flip on the main power to the upper floor, which triggers a message left behind by Frank Stevens.
This is Frank Stevens. The lower floor has been sealed and the lab powered down, as instructed. Only a signal redirector device can be used to regain access, and I'm taking that secret with me. The plans for the device, the prototypes, I'm gonna bury them. There's a manor house in Skemore. The soldiers will have cleared it out by now, so it's as good a spot as any. If anyone finds this message, hell, no one's getting back in here. Not once the quarantine is fully enacted. And if by some miracle you are listening to this, well, I am so sorry. The automated security will be powering up right about now.
Now that the power is back on, a robot patrols the area. I noticed on the walls in some of the offices, there were schematics alleging I could do a stealth takedown by pulling the battery while the robot is active. This was an absolute lie, and the battery can only be removed by overheating the robot in combat. In Frank's message, we were told about the plans for a signal redirector being buried in Skemore. This is to give you a lead to getting your hands on one of the 2 signal redirectors in the game if you haven't found one already. The buried note was found by Nora, and from there she leads you to both Dr. Garrow and the Protocol Field Agency, which would then lead you back to the workshop bunker to find the Windfall key. We already have one from Dr. Garrow, which means we can get to the lower levels. To open the door, we need power to both sides of the lab. This is another non-puzzle of the game, because all you're doing is clicking through until you reach the desired outcome. Accessing the lower level, we find a note on the body of a scientist, explaining that Frank threatened to seal off the lower level, but someone named Rosie locked herself in there, along with the key to the head office. The writer believes it could have had something to do with her loyalty to Dr. Garrow. This note also explains the security shutters can be raised by activating 3 security consoles throughout the room, and after destroying the robot's roaming, it's pretty easy to get the shutters open to retrieve the head office key from Rosie's dead body. Throughout the lower levels, there's a handful of notes on Oberon. The first is from the head of operations, someone named D.A. Lancaster, who reprimands Dr. Garrow for her 4th safety infraction. According to documents we found on the first floor, Garrow isn't really one to follow rules, and directly had Frank build her a signal redirector without notifying anyone, so she could redirect power to her robotic projects without going through the proper channels. We see this in a note from the crane control room as the crane operator expresses irritation that someone is redirecting his power to robotics, preventing him from doing his job. Unlocking the head office, we can find another Bard crate and Garrow's research note on the desk, accompanied by a note for Rosie to give to the people in the Oberon control sector. Garrow wants them to resume drilling, despite whatever fuss had led to a pause. She seemed more concerned about preventing a hiccup in her production line than with whatever problems were happening in Oberon control. Returning to Garrow, she's ecstatic to have her notes back, and while she's found some of what she's looking for, most of the important data is stored off-site in Casterfell Dam. She says if we're willing, she'll give us a key to the data store, where we can get all the answers we've been looking for. Her only stipulation is she doesn't want us taking anything out of the bunker, and when we're done, she wants us to run a command on the main terminal. Gen Era. We aren't sure why or what the command will do, but if it means we'll find the info we've been looking for, it's definitely worth the trip. The location of the data store seems to be the same place we heard holds info on whatever sample 1 is. If we're heading that way anyways, we could also power on the last radio tower for Tanner. But before heading that way, I decided to go through medical, and the train yard underneath, the last places we've yet to explore in the interchange. The medical wing is where we experience one of the scariest introductions to an enemy in the entire game. Walking forward, we can hear the sounds of voices, and after turning a corner, we stumble across our first thrall. A terrifying variant of infected enemy who wears a hazmat suit, isn't weak to fire, and is extremely durable. The way they just walk at you is super off-putting, and they can just tank shells like it tastes good, even with our upgraded weapons. My only issue with how scary this could have been is the fact there's no system for enemies to stay dormant, to try and jump scare you. Think Dark Souls or Elden Ring. You walk past a corner and some guy's sitting there ready to tickle your butthole. The moment you fire a round in medical, it triggers every thrall to start heading towards you, because now that they've heard you, their only goal is to reach and attack you. The same problem exists with the ferals, and it would have been cooler to see areas designed specifically to try and catch you off guard. Exploring medical further, we can find an audio log featuring a few names we've heard throughout the quarantine zone, namely Dr. Fisher, who we heard was put down in the L6 bunker, and Dr. Alan Holder, who was mentioned as potentially having the answers the surviving scientists needed.
What are you doing? Trying to help you, Dr. Fisher. Now stay still. No! Get that away from me, Alan. It's not... It's not tested. It'll save your bloody life. The infection's tearing you apart, trust me. Get away! Keep your experiments to yourself. Fisher!
We can also find a note describing the doctor's frustration at trying to help a woman named Mary, who was sick from something that wasn't radiation poison, but that the different sectors of the interchange couldn't share information between each other, and therefore they had no clue how to help. There's also another note about a security officer finding another dead test subject rodent who'd escaped and died elsewhere in the interchange, implying whatever the issue is with the rat swarms, it didn't occur naturally, and instead is the outcome of rats being tested on in the interchange that managed to escape and breed with a native population. Further into medical, we can also find an elevator that requires an unknown keycard to open, and looping back around to the waiting room, in a corner off to the side, we can find another audio log from Dr. Fisher, as well as a key.
Fisher's log, 28th of September, 57. I knew Dr. Holder was up to something. It's no secret he's been frustrated with the direction of our research, but this takes the biscuit. Last night, Edward let slip about a secret lab Holder has set up in Wyndham Village, under the church, apparently. Of all places. For a month, he's been stealing samples, smuggling out lab equipment, and all with God as his witness. Worst of all, Edward knew because he was planning to join him. Holder's got himself a little rogue scientist brigade. I managed to convince Edward to give me a key to the place. Once this fever is down, I'll march over and confront Holder myself.
Whoever this Alan Holder is, he began working on his own research involving the infection before the outbreak, and set up a lab in the forgotten cellar we found under the church. This Dr. Holder could probably explain to us what happened here, and why there's so much more infection in the medical wing compared to any other place in the interchange. Next to explore is the infected train yard. After taking a strange tonic, I enter to find an even greater amount of fungal growth I'd have to squeeze through to continue forward. In a room off to the right, we can find a note explaining that a Dr. Langley lost her mind and took the growth serum deeper into a cave connected to the train yard. Heading that direction, the amount of fungal growth is the most we've seen anywhere to this point. And a note tells us a number of scientists escaped the medical facility through this cave system. Among them was Dr. Fisher, who went to the L6 bunker with the other scientists, while Alan disappeared somewhere else, presumably to his lab under the church. The body of Dr. Langley can be found further back in the tunnel, as well as the container of growth stimulant. It looks fairly similar to the atomic batteries, and after grabbing it, we can hear the voices directing us to feed it to Oberon. No further contact with Mother Jago is needed to continue her ending, so we'll just hold on to this canister for now and continue forward in our mission to figure out what went on here. Heading to the church, we can now enter the Forgotten Cellar, where we find Dr. Alan Holder, alive and well, but his eyes are glowing blue like the Druids in the Speaking Cave or the traitor we found near the Casterfell Dam. He asks how we found him, and after learning we've been able to access the interchange, he's excited at the chance to be able to solve the problem that started there. We ask about his glowing eyes, and he says he found a way to inoculate himself to prevent the infection from taking over his mind. But a side effect is that his eyes are glowing, which requires him to hide out under the church to avoid protocol from imprisoning him. Alan reveals some of the craziest info we've seen so far, explaining that the infection that caused the ferals actually came from the scientists using a purified version of the fungal growth to create a serum to enhance their minds, the learning stimulant we've been injecting into our bodies with no thought throughout the entire game. This could possibly mean that without treatment, we'd also turn into a feral. According to Alan, his fellow colleagues would have been fine if they'd listened to him. Holder then gets right to the point, saying there isn't much time and that he needs us to help retrieve Sample 1 from the lower levels of medical. We heard about Sample 1 after booting up Data Store C, and according to Holder, it's the first sample of the fungus they extracted from Oberon that they began testing on a few months before the disaster. He doesn't explain why he needs it to stop Oberon, but promises to answer all of our questions honestly after we bring it back to him. He also offers us a dose of his inoculant to protect us from the infection. Taking it gives us a new skill, infection resistance. It causes infection sources to do less damage, and whenever we're infected, we'll no longer hear the voices. It also unlocks the ability to take 2 more perks, Healing Boost, which makes healing items more effective, and by far the most useless fucking perk in the entire game, Radiation Resistance. There are, to my knowledge, and I'm an expert, I've been playing this game for 24 days straight, a grand total of 2 sources of radiation in the entire game. The first is in robotics, the storage room of burnt out atomic batteries. This is where you can find the key to the control room needed to power on the upper level, which is needed to reach the lower level. Getting the key from here is not even required, because in an office right next to it, there's another key. The other source of radiation we haven't run into yet, but but it's literally just a barrel sitting in the middle of nowhere. It's insane someone thought a perk for this resistance was a smart idea when one of the big points the game has done everything possible to explain is that the disaster at the quarantine has nothing to do with radiation. That's before pointing out it's locked behind taking Alan's experimental inoculant, when he's probably the most obscure and secretive ending, at least according to the internet. Another thing to note is that if we didn't have glowing eyes yet from taking Mother Jago's tonic, we're sure to have them now, but it isn't actually a gameplay mechanic and never becomes a hindrance. At the very least, it would have made sense to make the protocol hostile to you or lock you out of Captain Sim's ending, but that isn't the case and it's just an L to pile on. So far, Holder seems like the most honest and good intentioned of the 6 people we could potentially escape with. Phone Guy is not at all open to share why he wants us to destroy Oberon or how he'll help us escape. Tanner has been extremely dishonest in what she's told us compared to what we've discovered about her mission as Agravain. Captain Sim's only goal is to get himself out of the zone before it's nuked from his failure to destroy the fungal growth. Mother Jago's goal is to help Oberon grow stronger, and Garrow has made it very clear we're only useful as far as we're helping her. Though she does claim the data store in Casterfell Woods will give us the answers we need. We'll check out the lower part of medical for sample 1 when we head back into the interchange, but for now we'll continue to Casterfell Woods to check out the data store and activate the last tower for Tanner. On the way, Phone Guy has a few words to share about Dr. Garrow.
Be aware of who your friends are. Be wary of what you let out. Dr. Garrow is not honest. Dr. Garrow is responsible for much. Beware who your friends are.
Heading back into the woods, the tower is on the way to the data store, so we'll stop there first. The note by the terminal directs us to the L9 bunker near the dam, the same bunker the Datlo Hall scientists fled to after the disaster. Now that we have a signal redirector, we can redirect power to the lever needed to turn on the ventilation, which will clear the control room of poison gas, and allow us to grab the key card we need off the desk. Instead of heading back to the tower, we're pretty close to the data store, which is right through this big poison room next to the bunker. There's literally nothing important here at all, and the solution is to find the key off this dead guy, then take that key out of the poison and open the door to the ventilation controls. But after clearing the poison, there's no real reason to access this area. There's no useful notes, no loot, and it's not even like it's the only entrance to the data store. You can literally walk around and climb down this area. They could have easily made it the only path to the data store, and it could have been like the 4th puzzle of the game. Heading into the data store bunker, the entire thing is powered off, but for a flamethrower robot patrolling the main bay. Like the data stores in the interchange, this one is powered by an atomic battery. But instead of the battery being missing, we learn in a note Dr. Garrow redirected power away from the servers herself, most likely during her original escape from the zone. Cue another non-puzzle of flipping signals, though this one includes rats that spawn after a fan is disabled. There are a few bard crates around and some more skill points, but the meat of the bunker is probably inside the server we're about to power on.
Power restored in Casterfell data store, long-term storage. Data interface console is ready for voice input.
Almost immediately after the bunker powers on, Joyce Tanner comes over the intercom.
Hello? Is that you? Or somebody else? Oh God, now I sound like an idiot. It's always isolation. Forgive the surprise, but I detected the power surge there. Look, that bunker you're in, I presume Garrow has you poking around there for something. Well, I need you to do something for me. That place contains the most recent experimental data from the site. It's vital that we get our hands on it. There should be a console. Transfer what data you can from the memory banks onto a tape. Let me see. Yes. The command gen move should do it. Bring the tape to me when you're done. Or I'll no longer be able to help you. Good luck.
At first, we had no idea what the command Gen Era would do, and I'm pretty sure that was by design and pretty good writing, because when Joyce tells us to run the Gen Move command to back up the data onto a tape, in that moment it becomes very clear what Dr. Garrow was asking us to do. Gen Era is the command to erase all the data being kept on the Windscale plant, and Dr. Garrow is using us to help cover up the experiments that went on here, and probably her potential involvement in the disaster itself. At the very least, we now have access to the console before we decide who to listen to, Joyce or Garrow, and we can ask it about a number of topics, including atomic batteries, Garrow, the interchange, the quarantine, Oberon, protocol, robots, and the Windscale plant. Choosing an option will cause it to print out a document with information on the subject matter, but we quickly learn this isn't at all the lore dump room we were expecting, as every single entry redacts vital information. Garrow's entry isn't even available, and we instead get an access denied message. She only sent us here to do her dirty work of destroying information about the Windscale plant's true purpose. Now this next story beat is one that I take issue with. We now have to decide whether to run the Gen Era command, erasing everything in the data store, or Gen Move, moving all of it onto an external data tape so Tanner can take it out of the zone. If we choose to run Dr. Garrow's command, the data will wipe and a power surge will cause the bunker to go dark. If we return to the interchange, we'll then be able to move forward with Garrow. Joyce Tanner will be angry, but we can talk her out of her aggression and convince her we don't know why the power surged and destroyed the data. The problem is, if we choose to copy the data over to the tape to bring to Tanner, Garrow will know, saying she saw the move command run from central processing. She then becomes hostile and you have to kill her. There's no way to talk her down and you'll be locked out of her ending for the rest of the run. I think it could have worked where neither Tanner nor Garrow were aware of what actually happened in the bunker, so you'd not be locked out of either. For this run, I wiped the data, knowing I could convince Tanner to still trust me afterwards. And heading back towards the interchange, I stopped by the final radio tower to activate it, but upon powering it on, we hear this message.
Alpha, Kilo, Ultimo, Tower, Aggravate, Delta, Statin, Corpus, Sigma, Hotel, Dedicate, Alpha, Kilo, Execute.
It sounds like code, and we can ask more about it when we return. Heading back into the interchange, before we report to Garrow or Tanner, we need to check out the lower section of medical for Dr. Holder to try and locate sample 1. We can now access the elevator shaft using Alan's key, and this is where I have to stop everything we're doing and point out how stupid this elevator door is. The game has a pretty shitty mechanic I haven't really gone over yet, where instead of having the freedom to prone and crawl around, there are staged holes you can crawl through. And we've been through many by this point because they're used quite often. But this one is insanely stupid. First off, the two doors are not the same width, and that's only because the broken one needs to be wide enough for us to actually crawl through it, and the standard width of the closed door is not enough. Also, why the fuck is there a hole here in the first place? What on God's green earth tore a man-sized hole through at least 3 inches of steel? There is no answer. This is just stupid. After killing a thrall, we can find part of a radio communication between Holder and Garrow from the day of the disaster.
Hello? Anyone receiving this? What the blue blazes happened just now? Who declared quarantine?
Dr. Holder.
Dr. Garrow? Is that you? Where are you?
Alan, listen to me.
Diane, where are you? Is this your doing? We're locked in.
There was an explosion. We had to...
Had to what? Where are you, Diane?
I'm on the evacuation convoy. I'm sorry, Alan. There was no time.
From this, we learn Garrow is actually the one who activated the quarantine protocol, the same protocol that caused the deaths of everyone in the interchange. A note we found in the Forgotten Cellar alleged Garrow wasn't even in charge of safety protocol, Holder was, and we know from everything we found on Garrow that she wasn't at all concerned with safety, and purposely ignored protocol to the detriment of others within the facility. We run into a few more thralls on our way to the observation room, and discover another note explaining how the scientists in medical began began attempting to create the learning stimulant in the hopes of being able to train people in whatever subject in as short as a few minutes. Lore-wise, I like the idea that they took the time to come up with a diegetic reason for the skill points. It's just a shame that over half of the skills I'm learning are completely useless. The note also says they were working on making a more concentrated form of the stimulant, which we know became the growth stimulant we were asked to retrieve from Mother Jago. Disabling the lockdown controls, we're able to enter the observation room. On a table next to an infected corpse, we find sample 1, an identical container to the growth stimulant. Further in the room, we can find the continued radio communications between Holder and Garrow that explains how her decision to enact the quarantine protocol was so much worse than we originally thought.
And on the evacuation convoy. I'm sorry, Alan. There was no time.
No time? We're still in the fail-safe period, Diane. Raise the quarantine level before it's too late.
I can't do that. Oberon must remain secure.
Diane, there's dozens of us still in the lab. Please suspend the quarantine, just for a few minutes.
I can't. I have to think of the many.
Are you quite insane? Wait. Wait. I know why you're doing this.
I'm sorry. I must go, Alan. The interference is too strong already.
Diane, don't you dare open the bloody doors, damn you. Diane! You can't trap us in here to die. I swear, if you don't...
So according to Dr. Holder, Garrow not only had the power to suspend the quarantine to let everyone inside the interchange escape, but there was also a failsafe period before the quarantine is meant to be called, specifically to allow people to escape. Dr. Garrow instead chose to only save herself before shutting down the entire facility, sealing the scientists' fates. Alan is cut off before elaborating on the reason he believed Garrow to be doing all of this, but it's pretty clear now. Garrow was much more concerned with her experiments to care about the safety of anyone else, and it was due to her actions that the Windscale disaster happened. Her request that the scientists in the Oberon lab keep drilling being the catalyst for everything that happened. To cover her own ass and avoid harming her reputation, she sealed off the facility to keep anyone from getting out to tell the story, and has only now come back to collect her research and cover her tracks further. Continuing on to a cave in the medical facility, we can find the Resistance Manual, the last manual in the game. The 3 skills give resistance to poison, bleed, and burn. Not the most useful at this point, since we already have every status effect potion we need. We can open a backtrack out of lower medical into the train yard we found the growth stimulant in, and can now decide whether to head back to Alan, Garrow, or Tanner. I decided to head to Alan first, and after handing him sample 1, he thanks us by telling us what Oberon actually is. And it turns out the crystal-like structure found deep in Slatendale Mines is actually a meteorite they discovered shortly after World War II. The outer shell of the meteor is the material that was used to create things like the atomic batteries and the artificial brains of the robots. While attempting to dig deeper into the meteor, they discovered it was hollow, and inside was the fungal growth that now plagues the quarantine zone. This means that the fungal growth infecting the minds of the quarantine inhabitants is actually an extraterrestrial organism. They began running tests on the matter and eventually created the learning stimulants and the growth serum, but after a while, people started showing early signs of something being wrong, as the fungal growth injections began making them ill. Before anyone could properly react to it, the Oberon team, pushed by Dr. Garrow, drilled too deep into the meteor, which caused some sort of high-energy feedback that collapsed part of the Windscale plant. Alan escaped through the tunnels underneath the medical lab, and thanks to his experimental inoculation, was able to keep from turning into a feral, unlike the other scientists who escaped to the L6 bunker. The reason for him setting up a secret lab was due to him and a few colleagues realizing there was more to the growth than the Bard higher-ups were willing to admit, and they wanted to continue researching on their own, and the corrupt vicar needed no more than a donation to the church to keep quiet about it. Alan explains his plan is to turn Sample 1 into a biological weapon to use against Oberon, but while he's working on it, he needs another favor. He's overheard from the protocol guards that Dr. Garrow has escaped the Skemore prison she was being held in, and he wants our help finding her. Now here is where I need to pause the story. So far I've tried pretty hard to tell this all in the best way possible, and the person with the best lore dump was Alan. But moving forward, we're gonna need to put his story on pause, telling him we're not exactly sure where she's at, and instead doing the other endings first. Now moving forward in the story from here is gonna be a bit more difficult to tell, as there are 6 different endings, with some being mutually exclusive to a point. I don't want to be too repetitive in the information being shared between them. Now we're gonna have to jump back to Garrow and Tanner's endings to continue. Returning to Dr. Garrow, we confront her about the external data store having only redacted information. She claims to have given us all the info we're allowed to know, and that we were crazy to expect anything more than redacted info in the first place. She stonewalls us when it comes to questions, but she says she's willing to let us escape with her thanks to our help. All she needs us to do is find Oberon and use the mining equipment to extract a sample from its core. After we bring her the sample, she'll let us escape with her. She specifically doesn't want us to destroy Oberon, saying she's found information that leads her to believe it's the source of the interference field, and believes the best outcome for the zone is for the interference to remain in place. Heading to Tanner next, we first spot the body of Ilya Kozlov. Tanner claims he ran in, and thinking he was a feral, she shot him. At the same time, she claims to not know who he is, but we're aware she's Agravain, and Kozlov was one of her comrades she was looking for. It's likely she sent out some sort of coded message on the radio towers to call any remaining comrades to her, specifically to tie up any loose ends. On his body we can find a key to an unmarked cache back in Skemore, and inside are 2 notes, one of which explains what we know by this point, that being the training simulants are made with an alien organism. The other gives us more details on the infiltration by the Russians into the interchange. From this we learn it wasn't something that had been going on for a long period of time, and had barely occurred before the explosion. Kozlov and his men had entered through the same cave system Dr. Allen would use to escape, and while they did accidentally trigger an alarm after breaking a vacuum tube, we already know they weren't the cause of the explosion at the Oberon site. Since we don't have the tape Tanner requested from the external data store, we first have to talk her out of aggression, after which she has a very similar request to Garrow. While not sure exactly what Oberon is, she knows it's something at the center of the wind scale plant that was found deep underground. She wants us to retrieve a sample of it for her, then destroy Oberon. She's discovered it's the source of the interference field, which needs to be taken out before she can get a signal out to call for evacuation. But she says the only way her people will let us come with is if we get that sample of Oberon. And with that, we are set up for all endings, and the next steps are the same for all of them. It first begins with us using the signal redirector to activate the central processing computer.
Activating central processor. Please stand back.
With the central processor active, the path to Oberon is now open, and we can now continue forward to the last area of the game. It should be noted I've been telling the entire story of the game as we go, but reaching this point could have happened as soon as you power on each section of the interchange, and after you've gotten your hand on one of the 2 signal redirectors. But this video was not meant to cut corners, and I did my best to give you the entire story as far as I was able to discover, while at the same time explaining why you yourself should not waste your time playing it. There's an expression I use in my friend group, touching the paint. We believe scientists when they tell us how many stars there are in the sky, but when a sign says wet paint, some people feel the need to touch it to be sure. I am one of those people. If you're also one of those people and you still want to try this game, like I said at the beginning, it's free to play through Game Pass, and probably will be for a while. If you're having the same crashing problem at launch, the solution I discovered was to toggle off this setting in the launcher. As you've seen, there's been a lot of work put into this video, so don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing to help a homie out. Special shout out to my hard drive. Been a real trooper through this one. Reaching the wind scale plant, the state of decay is apparent, and the level of infection is so thick we can hardly see the railroad tracks below. Despite the decay, we still hear a familiar ring of the red phone nearby.
Oberon is close. Oberon must die. Die must, Oberon. I'm your only friend. I'm not your only friend. Now Oberon must die. Oberon must die now. Destroy the wind scale is dead, then the way out will open.
Heading into the mist, the infection buildup is insanely strong, even with the inoculant, and it's still best to use the strange tonic to make your way through. There are areas to explore, but unfortunately, they're not all that useful. The wind scale plant has some of the most beautiful visuals in the entire game, but there is no reason at this point I need to be finding bard crates or skill points. This is the end of the game. What I need is ammunition, and spoiler alert, I'm hardly gonna find any. Heading towards Oberon, there are plenty of thralls and ferals, and the best strategy is to try to preserve ammunition for later. We can also find the second, and to my knowledge, the only source of radiation in the entire game. These barrels that are just sitting here. You could definitely argue that this adds to the narrative. Of course there's radiation damage, of course there's radiation resistance tonics. This was a nuclear power plant, and they were creating atomic batteries. To that valid point, I still argue it was done super lazily. Maybe the robots could have let off radiation when they were cooling down, or when they exploded. Maybe radiation would be more prevalent through sections of the interchange or on the way to Oberon. Like a lot of things in this game, it's just really poorly executed. Fighting our way to the last bunker door, we finally get the reveal of Oberon. And I gotta be honest, the buildup was definitely worth it for the spectacle I finally saw in this room. A massive glowing meteorite set in the middle of a giant cavern, the fungal growth just surrounding it. I was honestly so happy to see something so visually beautiful after the hours of shitty gameplay I had to sit through. And now you get to see it too. You're welcome. Entering the Oberon lab, we find a scale model of the meteor, as well as a note describing how the scientists became very aware it was more than just a simple rock. We can find the key to a storeroom on the desk, and down the hall, use said storeroom to access a dispatch tube. I have another major nitpick here. Why the fuck is there an entire locker full of Mother Jago's strange tonic? I don't believe there's anywhere in the lore that could explain why the scientists would have this serum we learned from a torn page out of a weird witch bitch's book, all the way in the lab where they were drilling Oberon. Even if the scientists did make this tonic, it would probably have been in medical, where experiments on the fungus were taking place. The strange tonic even acts similar to Dr. Holder's inoculation. They're practically two sides of the same coin, and no one in the lab was willing to give them a chance, so why the fuck would they have strange tonics here? Continuing further, we find the mining equipment, missing 2 atomic batteries. These are the last atomic batteries needed in the game, meaning of all the batteries we found, only 6 were ever needed. Off the top of my head, there were 2 freely in Casterfell, 1 on the Blue-Eyed Trader, 1 with Molly, and 1 freely collectible in Skemore. There were side quests you could do to get more, like the Vicar or the pub owner side quests, but in reality, not a ton of these are necessary. There are also 2 robots in the interchange freight yard who need to be killed to progress, which supplies 2 more batteries, and another one in the upper section of robotics. So if you can get your hand on a single battery in the wild, you can then kill the robots in the interchange and have enough to get to Oberon. Then the last 2 could be gotten from the robots patrolling the dig site. I get wanting multiple ways to find the atomic batteries, but there are like 30 of these bitches at least, and no other purpose for them in the game but to slip into the 6 slots that need them. Now with the drill on, we can head to the main control room where we get another stunning view of the meteor. This room is where we'll eventually need to flip every lever for the different endings. But for Garrow, all we need to do is extract a sample of the core.
Sample extraction sequence. Drilling will commence shortly. Please stand clear. Outer shell breached. Minor fractures detected. Overall stability compromised. Inner shell breached. Lowering extraction arms. Transporting extracted sample to sample grinder. Grinding and filtering sample. Please stand by.
With the sample extracted, we can collect it at the sample grinder, on the way having to deal with the number of thralls and the flamethrower robots patrolling the site. There's a note in the data storage room explaining how the scientists really had no idea what something like Oberon was, unsure if the hollow structure the fungus landed in was some sort of egg or if it was manufactured by some alien species for an unknown purpose. The worst part about getting this far is that there is still an insane amount of questions that remain unanswered, and besides the lore dumps we got earlier, there won't be anymore, though it is confirmed by another note that this meteor apparently landed during the time of Shakespeare, so it's likely that the Kepler star note we found earlier has something to do with Oberon. The reference to Shakespeare specifically explains where Oberon gets its name. In his play, A Midsummer Night's Dream, the king of the fairies was named Oberon. He's a mischievous and jealous character, and his pride is a driving force in the romantic comedy. Walking back through the Windscale plant, there's no more infection mist, but the fungal growth is still very much alive and well. Returning to central processing, we get a message from Garrow over the intercom.
My instruments have reported a successful mining operation at the Oberon site. Excellent work. It is time for us to exit stage left. I'm waiting by the evacuation tunnel. You'll find it in my office in the robotics laboratory. Bring the meteorite sample with you, and we can leave this horrible place.
Heading back through robotics, we can find Garrow waiting in the head office. She asks for the sample, and after giving it to her, it's finally time to escape.
This way, quickly. There's plenty of research for us to be getting on with.
That's one ending down. Next up is Tanner. To get to her ending, we need to extract the Oberon sample like before, then blow up the meteor to get rid of the interference field. Luckily, someone was already planning on doing this, but died before activating the explosives set up around the site. After activating the 4 explosives, we can head back to the control room to initiate the self-destruct sequence, giving us plenty of time to escape. Returning to the Windscale plant, we hear a message from the voices, Mother Jago being one among them. The fungal growth also looks a lot less lively than before.
What have you done, fool? You tried to destroy us? You think you can escape with one of the other heathens? There is no escape from what you are.
Any ending involving the destruction of Oberon will cause the plant to become populated by Druids, who aren't happy with our activities. Mother Jago will also appear and attack us, and she can easily be handled like any other enemy. Once we make it back to the first room of the Windscale plant, the phone rings again.
You have succeeded. Oberon is dead. And you have earned your reward. A way out. Go back to the beginning. Go back to where you awoke.
Since we've completed the phone guy's mission to destroy Oberon, we fulfilled the requirements for his ending. The same goes for Captain Sims as well, as both only required we help kill Oberon. Returning to central processing, Garrow can be heard over the intercom. She's not happy with us blowing up Oberon, but interestingly, we can still go to her with the sample and convince her destroying Oberon was the right move, and she'll still allow us to escape with her. This is also where I need to note the entire fucking interchange has been artificially blocked off. Practically every doorway out is closed after setting off the self-destruct. The only paths available take you to the Slatendale door or the Casterfell and Windham doors. This means if you even want to complete Garrow's ending after destroying Oberon, you had to open up the backtrack from lower robotics back to the Slatendale entry. Returning to Data Store C, Tanner is gone, but she left a message for us.
Hopefully you're still alive. I'd like to imagine it's you listening to this. Not some gruesome thingy. The interference field is fading. There's an extraction on the way, and I've gone to meet it. I'm including the coordinates in this transmission. Come and find me, and we can finally get out of this awful, awful place. Oh, and don't forget the Oberon sample.
We now have to make our way to Casterfell Woods, and heading to the vault door, we discover fighting between the Protocol and Druids. If we head out through the Windham door, we can also find the village in complete shambles, the Druids being in open combat with the Protocol. Once we get back into Casterfell Woods, we can find Joyce Tanner next to a helicopter in a field below the bunker we originally found her in. She asks us for the sample, saying her people will be extremely happy we got it for them. But instead of handing it over, we can ask who exactly her people people are. Though she refuses to answer, saying it doesn't really matter at this point, we can reveal we know her codename is Aggravain. She drops the act immediately and admits to being a fellow traveler, aka a communist bastard. She brings up mutually assured destruction, the idea of which is that if all sides nuked each other, everyone would lose, and that fact alone is what prevents any nukes from being dropped. She claims with the secrets of Oberon in the wrong hands, it could destroy the world, so her people are taking it to give to everyone, so no one can use it. Her logic is about as sound as her cover story for what happened to Kozlov, but to complete her ending, we hand over the sample, and she immediately shepherds us.
Sorry about that, but you'll live. My friends just want a little chat first. Well, more like a debrief, really. Actually, it's probably more like an interrogation.
We have now technically made it out of the zone, only to end up in the hands of the Soviet regime to be interrogated on what we've learned. For the two other standard destruction endings, from Windham, we can choose to head to Skemore to leave with Captain Sims, or return to the Slatendale bunker we started in. We'll start by heading back to the Slatendale bunker to do Phone Guy's ending. On returning there, we can use our signal redirector to open a previously inaccessible door, and inside there's a note telling someone named Haskin to quit prank calling people on the phone line. It's possible these were calls from the same phone guy, who, fun fact, is actually known as the operator in the game. I thought Phone Guy was funnier though, me when I spread misinformation. Heading back into the room we started in, the phone rings one more time.
You have done well. Thank you. If I told you, would you believe me? Should you believe me? We are what we do. That is who I am. You are what you have done here. You are done. You may leave. Do not distress yourself. I have never lied to you, and I tell you now, you will not die here. The gas is a necessity. When you awaken, all may become clear. You chose to trust me, a voice on a broken telephone. Perhaps just a voice in your mind. Did you ever consider that? You have learned much and come far. My apologies for the gas, but it was necessary. You left quite the trail of carnage, didn't you? But sometimes violence is necessary, I know. You listened to good advice and wise words, which is to say, my advice and my words. So many shoot first and ask questions afterwards. Not you, though. Oberon is dead. And the Windscale plant is destroyed. The interference field should rapidly fade now, and perhaps the outside world will finally see what has happened here. So ends the quarantine.
Now I'm going to be completely honest, this was not at all a satisfying ending or explanation to me. The operator's calls were coming across a broken phone, so it was all in our head. However, the note we just found implies others were hearing the voice over the phone as well, perhaps before the Windscale disaster. We could also find a note on a corpse in the northeast of Skemore, titled "Nobody Else Could Hear It Ringing." The note describes the writer's regret at ever answering the phone in the first place, as no one else could hear it ringing, but now he he couldn't stop answering, afraid he'd miss his chance for something. Besides that, there's no other explanation for the operator or who we are. It's honestly pretty disappointing since most people's driving force through a standard playthrough would be the mystery of who or what is behind the phone calls. The last standard destruction ending is Captain Sims. All we need to do for his ending is head back to the protocol camp in Skemore instead of heading to the starting bunker. We'll find Sims in camp next to a helicopter and can talk to him to leave.
And in a single bowl, we are free! Ah, splendid work! You'll go into the history books for this, you know. Atomfall couldn't have been fully realized without your help. By the end of next week, there won't be so much as a beetle still alive in the zone. Not a trace of the contamination left. Or anything. Or anybody, in fact. But you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs, eh? Ooh, omelette. Something to look forward to. I do love a good omelette. Don't you?
So now that Sims is free to leave, he's choosing himself, seemingly, to activate Operation Atomfall, destroying everything and everyone in the zone. I have a problem with this ending I'll bring up later, but for now I'm sure a lot of you can just guess what my issue with it is. The last two endings are Alan and Mother Jago. We'll start with Alan right where we left off earlier. After bringing him Sample 1 and learning the true nature of Oberon, Alan tells us his plan to turn Sample 1 into a poison to kill the fungal growth at the source. He says he needs time, but also requires we do one more thing before he's willing to help us escape. Find where Dr. Garrow is. This is a pretty easy request since we know exactly where she is. The central processing room of the interchange. Upon telling him this, Alan says he'll meet us there when the poison is done. Heading back to the interchange, we can catch a conversation between the two as we make our way in.
Hello, is somebody in here? Good lord, I can hardly believe it. Alan Holder. Alive and kicking. After all these years. If there's one thing I admired about you, it was your persistence. Are you just gonna stand there? What is it you want?
Alan then kills Garrow on the spot and justifies it by explaining she was the cause of what happened here. Her hubris led to the failure of the entire Oberon project, and despite readings that showed an explosion was likely if drilling continued, Garrow pushed on anyways, and her actions led to the deaths of everyone in the facility, and in a way makes her responsible for all the deaths within the quarantine zone. We've already found evidence of this ourselves, and the nail in the coffin is a note on her body, describing how her career was already in shambles after escaping the Windscale disaster. With Garrow dead, Alan tells us all we need to do is get to Oberon and use the poison on it. The events to get to Oberon are the same: powering on the central processing computer, fighting our way to the dig site, and upon reaching the control room, instead of powering on the drill to extract a sample, or activating the explosives around the site, we need to instead activate the two fire safety hoses on either side of the meteor. We can then find the fire safety fluid input and insert the poisoned Sample 1 canister. Heading back to the control room, we can flip on the fire safety system and get this really cool visual.
Fire safety system activated. Firing foam cannon. Warning. Abnormal readings detected. Overall stability compromised. Fire safety system error. Error. Alert. Please evacuate the interchange. Structural integrity compromised.
Returning to the Windscale plant, everything looks quite dead, and the voices can be heard angry at our actions. We still fight Druids and Mother Jago on the way back, and since this counts as destroying Oberon, we still get the call from Phone Guy, and can still choose his or Sim's ending. Back in the interchange, Alan can be heard over the intercom. He says the evacuation route is below medical, so again, I am not sure how the fuck you'd be able to complete this ending if you didn't make sure to open up this backtrack from lower robotics. Someone could have easily missed this shit in their playthrough. We find Alan deep in the train yard and tell him we're ready to go.
I owe you every thanks the country does. Damn it, the world does. The infernal whispering in my mind that has dogged me for 5 years, they're fading into silence. Blissful silence. Do you understand? The toxin is working. Soon the interference field will come down and people will begin to arrive from outside. There may be some awkward questions when that happens. People who haven't lived through what we have might not understand why we did what we did. Come on. We should leave before they arrive. For the moment, we're potential specimens, not people. Now, are you ready? Stay close. There's a secret route out here. With luck, these wretched blue eyes of ours will fade over time. Until then, we'll need to hide where no one can find us. Come on.
So Holder acts like this entire time up to his last words to us like he has a way out, when in reality he doesn't, and instead his plan is for you to hide away in a bunker below the interchange until both his and our eyes are back to normal. Mother Jago's ending can be chosen by simply activating the 2 fire safety hoses, but instead of loading the poison canister, we can load the growth stimulant instead, giving us another cool visual upon pulling the lever.
Fire safety system activated. Firing foam cannon. Warning. Abnormal readings detected. Oberon stability compromised. Fire safety system error. Error. Alert. Please evacuate the interchange. Structural integrity compromised.
Something funny I discovered here is there aren't any safety checks added by the developers to prevent you from hosing down Oberon after extracting a sample, and there's no animation for the broken meteor being covered by poison or stimulant, meaning it just magically heals itself when the animation starts. Instead of Druids attacking us on our way back through the Windscale plant, it's protocol soldiers, including Captain Sims, and upon killing him, we can find a note on his body from his daughter. After his last deployment overseas ended, he was sent to lead the quarantine protocol instead of going home to his family, which was his driving reason for trying to get out of the zone. Heading back towards the interchange, the call from the phone guy is a lot different.
You have failed me. Us, everyone. All is lost. Your rationalizations mean nothing.
On our way to the Casterfell Woods door, we can find Joyce Tanner's body in the hallway on the way there, killed during the fighting between the Protocol and Druids. Mother Jago can be found in the basement ruins of the Druids' castle, the same spot we killed the priestess in.
My dear, you are our miracle. The voice is singing like never before. There is one last leap you must make, and then you will be free. Throw yourself into the pit. I am right behind you, child. Let the soil catch us. Let it set us free.
We jump into the pit, killing ourselves as the fungus grows around us. She claims she'll jump behind us, but we'll never know. And that is the story of Atomfall. Every single side quest, every single plot point, all tied together in the best possible way I could come up with. During my recorded playthrough for this video, there were plenty of bugs. These bugs, glitches, whatever you want to call them, were not purposely programmed into the game, and because of that I can overlook them if the bones are good. But in Atomfall's case, the bones are far worse. The melee combat is bad, the crafting is bad, the balancing is bad, the skill system is bad, the stealth is bad, and the swarms are bad. Pretty much everything about this game that was purposely programmed to be there is bad. The story is way better than the game is, and is what drove me to make this video. There are plenty of interesting things set up throughout the world, and discovering the secrets of the interchange is well done, but it also feels like no one thought out the endings. Garrow's ending maintains maintains the status quo of the quarantine zone. This theoretically protects it from Operation Atomfall, assuring that at least for now, the people inside will continue to live their miserable lives. Garrow escapes with the sample to continue her research, and sees no consequences for her actions that led to the disaster in the first place. Mother Jago's ending is super lame and doesn't at all feel well thought out. You don't get any special powers or anything from following her, nothing to tempt you in the direction of feeding Oberon. It's just a death cult that probably leaves the fate of the quarantine inhabitants to become druids or at worst become ferals themselves. But if we do any destruction ending, if we go with Captain Sims or not, the fate of the quarantine is most certainly going to be Operation Atomfall, since he's able to escape and enact it. We can get captured by the commies, escaping Atomfall, get knocked out in a bunker which might protect us from Atomfall, or hide in another bunker with Alan, probably protecting us from Atomfall. None of the choices we have can guarantee the safety of anyone in the zone. Phone Guy is probably the biggest letdown. Literally no explanation as to what or who he is. I got a ton of little nitpicks here too that I'm just gonna fire off. Why did Captain Sims refuse to torture Garrow when he was perfectly willing to burn down the little tea room with June inside? A note in the Skemore prison claims the general population section is overcrowded, causing people like Garrow to be moved to solitary confinement, but most of these cells are empty. How did Francis Stevens get out of the upper level of robotics to bury a signal redirector schematic in Skemore when the interchange was completely locked down? Atomic batteries burning out is stupid and defeats the idea that there's some insanely good source of power. Theoretically, they could have burnt out if we took too long, locking us in a power down section of the interchange. Why was that body on the robotics assembly station for no reason? Why would you have a schematic say stealth takedown on them? Why is there dirt and rocks surrounding Oberon like it crashed on the surface when they found it underground? How did it crash underground? There's probably more, but this is all I could think of off the top of my head. There's one more thing we need to touch on, and that is every lead we got about some dude trying to build a boat to escape the quarantine. None of these notes ever led to anything, and there's even a boathouse location in Windham with absolutely no purpose at all. Now, why would this be the case? The answer is there's a DLC called The Wicked Isles that will probably tie into these previously leadless notes. Billy Gorse told us a bit about the Druids, explaining they previously lived peacefully on an island nearby before the disaster. We can actually see these islands on the edge of Casterfell Woods, and if we look hard enough, we can even see structures on the islands. I'm practically certain that these leads are connected to the Wicked Isles DLC, which happened to release before I completed this video. I am curious to see what new lore was added with this content update, but I'm pretty certain it's not going to include anything that ties up the story in any better way, as it seems more like an added side quest than a story expansion. But we'll see, and if you want, I could do a video on the DLC as well, so you don't have to play that either. For now, that's all I got. Thank you guys for watching, and if you made it this far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what other games you want me to do videos like this on. And as always, have a good day.